também, né?
Sim, pronto. A reunião já está sendo transmitida pelo YouTube.
Ryan, você pode dar início à sessão.
Boa tarde a todos e a todas. Good afternoon, everybody who is participating in the second conference of our International Meeting on Pragmatism. Bem-vindos a esta segunda conferência do nosso encontro internacional sobre pragmatismo. E temos neste momento a conferência do professor Vincent Colapietro, que vai falar sobre Imediatez, alteridade e mediação. In this second conference, we have the participation of Professor Vincent Colapietro, who will be presenting his paper on immediacy, alterity, and mediation. Thank you so much, Professor, for your participation today, and we give you the stage.
Thank you so much. It's with gratitude and humility that I stand before you, if only on the screen. There is a subtitle, and it's perhaps as important, if not more important, than the title, and that is Time, Music, and Peirce's Categories. Okay, we'll go to the text itself. Do I have control over this? Or do you? Oh, allow me to cut to the capture, not merely the chase. In Peirce's hands, the elaboration of a categorical scheme is strikingly akin to the composition of a musical score. In turn, his categorical framework provides an extremely valuable resource for exploring musical works, including improvisational performances. In brief, we can discern in Peirce's efforts and accomplishments an intersection of the categorical and the musical. In themselves, the categories are rhematic signs of possibility, whereas in their actual deployment, their critical links to experiential disclosures are, at least, intimations of the most fundamental similarities and differences. In themselves, musical signs point, as Professor Santaella has so compellingly argued in print, and as she will so helpfully remind us today, such signs point to the category of firstness and its expression in the rhematic quasi-signs presenting themselves as nothing less than revelations of possibilities, and often of more than mere possibilities. Ontologically, Peirce's categorical scheme and, say, Mahler's symphonic compositions are of a piece. As elaborated by Peirce, this framework is in part an exploration of purely formal possibilities, but it is grounded in, or at least relevant to, experiential exemplifications. In fact, countless experiential exemplifications of even the seemingly most abstract possibilities. There is something irreducibly general and vague about the categories, but their relevance to experience is more than anything else their very point and purpose. In a surprisingly favorable assessment of John Stuart Mill's intellectual qualities, Peirce, however, also, less surprisingly, stresses one qualities his predecessor did not possess. As someone writing a treatise on logic, Mill needs a flock of other qualifications other than the ones praised so highly by Peirce: subtlety, consecutive thought, and unblinking candor. Mill needs a flock of other qualities, which he did not possess. In particular, a keen scent for the novel, the chess player's power of grasping together in their relations a vast mass of items without losing sight of any of them. And here's the one most relevant to this occasion: a sort of intellectual music in his soul by which he recognizes and creates symmetries, parallels, and other relationships of form. And finally, the mathematician's generalizing faculty. The very best logicians possess an intellectual music in their psyches by which they are able to recognize and create symmetries, parallels, and other forms of relations. Such a musical sensibility is nowhere more dramatically on display than in Peirce's efforts to elaborate a theory of categories, serving to prompt, guide, and on many occasions, redirect investigation. In Peirce's writings, the melody of thought, that's his expression. In Peirce's writings, the melody of thought ascending to the level of generality, characteristic of the categories, the melody of thought eventuates in a heuristic theory of unsurpassed power. When we take a tentative step toward translating these categorical forms into phenomenological language, when we render firstness, secondness, and thirdness as, say, qualitative immediacy, immediate opposition, and mediation running from the most rudimentary to the most intricate, when we do this, we begin to feel their power. This is what I want on this occasion to render plausible by thinking about Peirce's categories in relationship to music, both the musical sensitivity identified above in the passage on Mill and the categorical description of music suggested by the imaginative deployment of the Peircean categories. Time, music, and the categories. Now allow me to go over this ground more slowly, but also, alas, still too hastily. In other words, one more once, which is an idiomatic way of saying one more time. And it's attributable to Count Basie, the great orchestra leader. Herbert Snyder once suggested, Peirce's treatment of the categories seems sometimes playful and at best, experimental. He often analyzes by threes for the sheer fun of it, and occasionally even subjects the same subject matter to different triadic patterns. The tone of a critical voice is unmistakably audible in Snyder's suggestion. I accept the substance of what Snyder is suggesting. Peirce's investigation of categories is at times purely playful, and at times essentially experimental, and at best essentially experimental. In my judgment, neither the playful nor the experimental character of Peirce's investigations invites or warrants criticism, just the opposite. These are, for me at least, reasons to praise Peirce's efforts. In his brief but suggestive treatment, and here I'm drawing upon the 1903 lectures on pragmatism. In his brief but suggestive treatment of the phenomena of pain and pleasure, Peirce highlights two facets of pleasure. First, there is a distinctively cognitive or intellectual aspect to pleasurable experience. While pain mainly consists in a struggle to give a state of mind its quietus, pleasure resides in a peculiar mode of consciousness allied to the making of a generalization, in which not feeling, but rather cognition is the principal constituent. Peirce concedes this may be hard to make out as regards the lower pleasures, but it is ordinarily manifest in the higher ones. For example, and he's thinking specifically of music, he's not thinking of Mahler, but that's neither here nor there. The higher ones, the pleasure derived from listening to a Mahler symphony or to crafting a logical demonstration. After confessing he is ignorant of art, and that requires some explanation, what he's really confessing to when he says that, but we'll push that aside for the moment. After confessing he is ignorant of art, Peirce claims to possess a fair share of capacity for aesthetic enjoyment. On the basis of experience such enjoyment, presumably, he offers this suggestion. It seems to me that while in aesthetic enjoyment we attend to the totality of feeling, and especially to the total resultant quality of feeling presented in the work of art we are contemplating, yet it is here a sort of intellectual sympathy, a sense that here is a feeling that one can comprehend, a reasonable feeling. Let me just interject here that I am very intrigued by what he identifies elsewhere as the firstness of thirdness. And I think that music is a rather dramatic exemplification of the firstness of thirdness. While the accent to some extent falls on the intellectual dimension of aesthetic experience, it falls not less decisively on feeling itself, though a rather complex or intricate form of feeling. Peirce is acutely aware that he has failed to identify with sufficient clarity this complex phenomenon, but the point he is driving at is one he desires his readers to appreciate. I do not succeed in saying exactly what the distinctive feeling of aesthetic enjoyment is. It is obvious that Peirce is struggling simply to identify aesthetic phenomena as such. The reasons for this have little or nothing to do with his alleged ignorance of art, or for that matter, with any supposed deficiencies in his linguistic ability. I submit this. They principally have to do with the elusive and complex nature of the phenomena themselves. What he does assert, however, is highly suggestive. This is especially true of the expressions he hits upon: intellectual sympathy and reasonable feeling. While it might seem as though there could not be, from a Peircean perspective, a reasonable feeling, would this not be an instance of the thirdness of firstness? While it might seem that this could not be the case, he is too good a phenomenologist to allow an apparent prohibition rooted in the legitimate combination of his three categories to dismiss what, ironically, both the phenomena and his categories at least intimate, if they do not actually bring these phenomena into sharp focus. Feelings in themselves are unintelligible and are neither reasonable nor unreasonable. Qualitative immediacies in utter abstraction from any concrete embodiment are one thing. Embodied qualities are, however, quite another. What makes all the difference is time. A succession of qualities in which directly perceptible relations. For example, the dramatic contrast between the most profound silence and a shrill sound shattering that silence, a succession of qualities in which directly perceptible relations, and beyond such perceptual relations, indefinitely imaginable ones, a succession which constitutes the temporal flux as an utterly unique form of objective continuity. That's a long sentence. What I most want you to take away from it is this emphasis on the temporal flux as an utterly unique form of objective continuity. A continuum in which contrasting events can be simultaneously present, and no less, the very form of the same events can be sequentially scattered or dispersed. Such a continuum is, I submit, an especially intriguing and possibly extremely illuminating form of continuity. Music perceptibly and intellectually, also affectively and formally, I might add, viscerally and abstractly, music is quite paradoxical. Music confronts us with nothing less than such a continuum. The harmonious fusion of disparate elements over especially an extended stretch of time very well might be the heart of the matter. In any event, music does not so much offer us a metaphor of time as it veils us opportunities to experience the textures, trajectories, and indeed originations of temporal forces in their ceaseless interplay. That is, it avails us opportunities to live time contemplatively rather than living it existentially. In doing so, music invites us to appreciate how time is not primarily a process of ceasing to be. It is rather, for the most part, a process of coming to be, and even when it seems to be tightly constrained by an immanent logic and perhaps even somewhat predictable, music reveals time to be a sequence of occasions for novelty and surprise. This is so truly the case that in music, coming to be perceptibly manifests itself among that music, this is so truly the case that in music coming to be perceptibly manifests itself. And we'll leave it at that right for now. However much some might insist upon catching in the flow of music, the eternal, others, and I would include myself here, stress the irrepressible eruption of radical novelty in all its irreducible temporality. To put this much more simply, for me, the transcendence of time is a moment and an achievement in time. Purely instrumental music presents us with the unimpeded flow of evolving intelligibility, though a flow in which pauses, hesitancies, repetitions, especially apparent breaches or ruptures, are integral to this very flow. The presence of these pauses, hesitancies, repetitions, and apparent breaches does not destroy the continuum. They only reveal just how complex and intricate are some forms of continuity. Nowhere is the firstness of thirdness more perceptibly available to human consciousness than here. The flow of musical time provides us with affectively charged forms of experiencing experiential time, insofar as the latter is an intelligible history out of which, in the very face of absurdity, randomness, and chaos, an incipient intelligibility emerges and unfolds. In music, we are confronted with a congruent concession of continuous but discrete feelings, often arranged in the most intricate of patterns, just as often involving effective uses of repetition and recursion, as well as strictly logical elaborations and abductive transitions and juxtapositions. Intense, sustained enjoyment can be derived from aesthetic engagement with, especially immersion in, masterful interpretations of such musical compositions. Dewey suggests even a discipline such as philosophy affords some thinkers genuine opportunities for aesthetic enjoyment. Although few philosophers have found a significant form of expression for their ideas, when expression is judged by the criterion of literature, nevertheless, philosophy performs, Dewey suggests, philosophy performs for some exactly the same office, the same function that the fine arts perform for others. There is, Dewey adds, a kind of music of ideas that appeals, apart from any question of empirical verification, appeals to minds of thinkers who derive an emotional satisfaction from an imaginative play synthesis of ideas, perhaps obtainable by them in no other way. This would be if it operated completely apart from logical coherence, empirical adequacy, categorical integrity, and other strictly methodological criteria. This would be an instance of what Peirce would dub the very debauchery of thought. But such an appreciation for the music of ideas might serve their logical elaboration and their empirical validation. That is, it might not constitute a system apart from thought in its logical sense, but rather be a system integral to the elegant execution of an experimental inquiry. Peirce's categories are, contra Rhode, anything but an ahistoric framework, though this scheme is designed to be all-embracing. The framework constitutes a self-consciously historical achievement. Even when Peirce most manifestly seems to claim otherwise, his sense of historicity is audible. To erect a philosophical edifice that shall outlast the vicissitudes of time, my care must be, not so much to set each brick with the finest accuracy as to lay the foundations deep and massive. But he immediately looks back to the example of Aristotle. That is, Aristotle is truly an exemplar for how to engage in the task of constructing a theory of categories. Moreover, Peirce situates himself historically. Less obviously, but no less critically, he knows the best he can ever offer is an hypothesis in line with the growth of ideas. He envisions himself in an ongoing drama of intellectual history. To quote, "We want to place ourselves historically and take the next step in the most vigorous and prompt way. In a parallel passage, take the next step in an intellectual drama." The word drama is his, not mine. As it turns out, the implications of his thought are fundamentally anti-foundationalist, and they are so because he is so resolutely historicist. Experimental science is itself a historic achievement. As such, it is unintelligible apart from its history. As a logician, Peirce was a historian of science and indeed of logic, just as he was in his role as a philosopher. In his role as a philosopher, a historian of philosophy. Upon my reading, then, Peirce's categorical scheme is a self-consciously historical framework having its function in its relevance to the work of inquirers who are never more than unwitting actors, but in relatively rare moments, prescient players who have an uncanny feel for promising directions of heuristic development. His elaboration of a scheme was at times playful and at best experimental. He was aware of, but not dissuaded by, the numerous difficulties confronting his philosophical ambitions. Far more, he was taken by the opportunities and possibilities for discoveries afforded by the intricate interplay of his three categories. The heuristic power of the Peircean categories cannot be ascertained from their purely formal articulation. It can only be glimpsed in terms of their historical interplay, a complex process in which the boundaries between what is eternal to the categories in their formal elaboration and what is to them external or part of their external deployment, that boundary turns out in practice to be very hard to draw. Conclusion. As musical as Apollo's lute. The notes on the pages of a musical score, are indications or for instructions on how a piece is to be performed. though they cannot help but be underdetermined. They're going to underdetermine the performance. There's always a degree of inventiveness, creativity, and improvisation, even in the most tightly scripted score. The words on the pages of Peircean text invite and guide a heuristic performance. But they too cannot avoid being underdetermined. This seems to me especially true when those pages are presentations of his categories. Properly understood, Peirce's categories constitute a flexible, expansive, and reflexive instrument of inquiry, enabling us to discover unsuspected affinities and no less unimagined differences. Also, to discern the fault lines in inherited distinctions and the debilitating conflations in unquestioned syntheses. In my judgment, their generality is matched by their fecundity and recursivity. But what matters above all is, for a pragmatist, for an inquirer, for an experimentalist, what matters above all is their fecundity, the work they do in guiding, goading, and inevitably redirecting inquiry. In no small measure, they help us to identify obstacles thrown in the path of inquiry, and beyond this, to provide ingenious suggestions for how to remove these heuristic obstacles. The fluency of even a practitioner, such as an inquirer, such fluency is attained only as the result of a deep, deft, and nuanced attunement to the field in which that individual is acting or performing. The artful uses of heuristic instruments, uses rooted in having a feeling for how these instruments might be innovatively deployed, are truly akin to the artful uses of musical ones, beginning with a personal investment in their proper use and a cherishing concern for their maintenance. The historical uses of the Peircean category suggest as much, and for many of us, much more. In Peirce's judgment, the work of thought can be heard to be not harsh and crabbed, as dull fools suppose, but musical, as in Apollo's lute. If we have no sensitivity for his categories being intricate instruments on which the most subtle music might be composed and indeed improvised, if we have no such sensitivity, do we not reveal ourselves to be dull fools? Thank you.
We thank you very much, Professor Vincent, for this wonderful conference.
Thank you.
Agradecemos ao professor por essa conferência tão iluminado. E agora passamos a palavra para a professora Lúcia Santaella para os seus comentários. We now pass the floor to Professor Lúcia Santaella for her comments.
Share screen. Intro. It's here.
Pode colocar em modo de tela cheia, professora?
Ok. Tudo bem? Posso começar?
Tá perfeito.
Já perdi de vista quantas vezes fui, com muitíssimo prazer, comentadora dos textos de Vincent Colapietro ao longo dos anos, com que Ivo Ibre e sua equipe têm heroicamente levado à frente este admirável evento e me dado a honra dele participar. O texto que eu recebi, que me foi enviado para comentar, tem nada menos do que 30 páginas, de modo que este que foi aqui apresentado é uma síntese. O texto está recheado de pontos luminosos que me colocaram diante do desafio de uma escolha difícil daquilo que deveria colocar em relevo para um comentário de uns poucos minutos. O título do texto, Immediacy, Alterity and Mediation, remete indubitavelmente para as categorias fenomenológicas, pois nele estão, de fato, nomeadas as categorias de primeiridade, Immediacy, secundidade, Alterity, e terceiridade, Mediation. Isso funciona como um convite para pensarmos de modo mais sutil, como Colapietro o fez, não só sobre as categorias, mas principalmente sobre suas consequências pragmaticistas. O subtítulo do texto, Time and Music, dirige nossa atenção para o modo como a música nos fornece elementos para discutir as categorias, ao mesmo tempo em que a própria música, de modo reverso, pode ser iluminada pelas categorias. Com isso, está aqui já delineado o caminho que decidi tomar para este diálogo de concordância e complementações com as ricas ideias que Colapietro defende e que tomo aqui para acompanhá-lo como uma defesa das categorias. Ultimamente, tenho pensado e, inclusive, publicado sobre algumas das razões que impediram e ainda continuam impedindo que a obra de Charles Sanders Peirce seja mais ampla e merecidamente incorporada ao pensamento contemporâneo. Temos que convir que, infelizmente, a sua lógica filosófica, concebida como semiótica, não tem sido lida, absorvida, conhecida e divulgada como merece. Porque, desde o final do século XIX, vem enfrentando todos os obstáculos impostos pelos mainstreams da lógica e das diferentes correntes bem-sucedidas da filosofia. A lógica tomou o caminho da lógica simbólica dedutiva, que para Peirce constitui-se apenas em um dos tipos de lógica. A filosofia, por sua vez, desmembrou-se, de um lado, na filosofia analítica, que apresenta reservas em reconhecer Peirce como um antecessor, e, de outro lado, na filosofia continental pós-estruturalista, cuja repercussão, em especial na América Latina, tem sido notável. Além disso, Peirce tomou a fenomenologia como seu ponto de partida. Infelizmente, sua teoria sofre a concorrência injusta da fenomenologia europeia, de modo que, para compreender Peirce em seus próprios termos, é preciso deslocar sua fenomenologia por sua diferença daquela tradição. Insatisfeito, descontente com as categorias aristotélicas, kantianas e hegelianas, Peirce se impôs a primordial tarefa de estabelecer uma lista formal e universal de categorias a partir de uma radical análise de todas as experiências possíveis. Não vou colocar em discussão aquilo que me parece absurda, como absurda a afirmação de Schneider de que o tratamento que Peirce dá às categorias é playful e, at best, experimental. De resto, uma afirmação que se volta contra o próprio autor, por revelar quão raso é seu conhecimento, não só das categorias, mas, sobretudo, do imenso esforço mental que Peirce dispensou, inclusive por métodos diferenciados ao longo dos anos, para chegar a aceitar as suas próprias categorias. Ouçamos Peirce. A fenomenologia ou doutrina das categorias tem por função desenredar a emaranhada meada daquilo que em qualquer sentido aparece e enrolá-la em formas distintas, ou, em outras palavras, fazer a análise mais radical de todas as experiências é a primeira tarefa a que a filosofia tem que se submeter. Ela é a mais difícil, talvez a mais difícil de suas tarefas, exigindo poderes de pensamento muito peculiares. A habilidade de agarrar nuvens vastas e intangíveis, organizá-las em composição ordenada, colocá-las através de seus exercícios. A simples leitura desta espécie de filosofia, a simples compreensão dela não é fácil. Nada parecido com uma justa compreensão dela não foi realizada por muitos daqueles que escreveram livros. Um trabalho original neste terreno, se é que ele venha a ser uma verdade real, até agora não formulada, é isto, sem falar se ele é difícil ou não, é uma daquelas funções do crescimento que todo ser humano, talvez, exercita apenas uma vez na vida. Alguns até 2 vezes, mas estaria perto de um milagre desempenhá-la uma 3ª vez. Fim da citação. Não obstante a enorme importância que as categorias apresentam como guias para a composição das disciplinas no edifício filosófico de Peirce, não obstante a potência das categorias para o mapeamento do nosso próprio pensamento diante de tudo aquilo que a realidade nos apresenta, as categorias são apenas descritivas. Compreender essa natureza das categorias significa, ao mesmo tempo, compreender que é para a semiótica que o funcionamento finamente analítico e o poder recursivo das categorias é transferido. Vamos ouvir Peirce mais uma vez. 1, 2, 3 são ideias tão gerais que elas podem ser vistas mais como tons ou humores do pensamento, do que como noções definitivas, mas que têm grande significado para tudo isso. Vistas como numerais, elas são, na realidade, finos esqueletos do pensamento. Se é que não sejam meras palavras. Se apenas quiséssemos fazer enumerações, seria descabido perguntar pelas significações dos números que deveríamos usar. Pois bem, supõe-se que as distinções da filosofia buscam algo que está além disso. Elas têm a intenção de mergulhar na essência das coisas. E se vamos fazer uma única distinção filosófica, triforme, isso exige de nós que perguntemos, antes de tudo, que espécies de objetos são primeiro, segundo e terceiro. Não como sendo assim contados, mas nos seus próprios caracteres verdadeiros. que há realmente tais ideias, como 1, 2 e 3, vamos encontrar razões para admitir. Fim da citação. Após esta brevíssima defesa das categorias, no que me resta de tempo, escolhi pensar um trecho do texto de Colapietro, que, dentre todos os outros, me parece o mais luminoso, relativo à natureza fenomenológica e semiótica da música, no seu poder de revelar a temporalidade do pensamento. Um dentre outros momentos é aquele em que Colapietro comenta Zuckerkandel e menciona a vivência contemplativa do tempo em lugar de sua vivência experimental, não, existencial. Ao fazer isso, a música nos convida a apreciar como o tempo é uma citação de Colapietro aqui. A música nos convida a apreciar como o tempo não é um processo de deixar de ser. Ele é mais, na maior parte, aquele de vir a ser. E mesmo quando constrangido por uma lógica imanente e, de certo modo, previsível, o tempo se revela como uma sequência de ocasiões para a novidade e a surpresa. Lembro aqui a famosa afirmação de Peirce, no fim do século XIX, de que todas as artes aspiram à condição da música. É nesse ponto que a categoria da primeira idade e sua expressão no qualissigno icônico remático apresentam-se como reveladores. A proeminência dos caracteres qualitativos do som e extensivamente da música impõe-se por si mesma, nunca tendo cessado de ser posta em relevo pelos músicos e musicólogos. O som é airoso, ligeiro, fugaz, emanando de uma fonte. O som se propaga no ar por pressões e depressões, percorrendo trajetórias sujeitas a deformações, cujos contornos e formas nunca se fixam. Vem daí a qualidade primordial do som, sua evanescência, feita de fluxos e refluxos, em crescimento contínuo, pura evolução temporal, que nunca se fixa em um objeto espacial. O som é omnidirecional, sem bordas, transparente e capaz de atingir grandes latitudes. Não tropeçamos nos sons. Ao contrário, ele nos atravessa. Por isso mesmo, a música é o único tipo de manifestação que pode se apresentar dominantemente como mera qualidade monástica, simples imediaticidade qualitativa, presença pura, movente e fugidia, tão pura que chega a permitir sua liberdade de qualquer comparação com algo que lhe seja semelhante, de qualquer discriminação daquilo que lhe dá corpo, de qualquer intelecção da lei ou regras que nela se atualizam. É certo que outras linguagens também podem alcançar um nível similar de desprendimento. A poesia, por exemplo, especialmente a simbolista, ou mesmo muitas pinturas, especialmente as abstratas, alguns vídeos, etc. Quando isso se dá, no entanto, essas artes chegam perto de uma condição que é própria da música, Essa condição se explica através da preponderância do qualitativo, em detrimento da referencialidade. Qualidade se afirma de maneira tão positiva, qualidade tal qual é, que o aspecto do legissigno indispensável à organização interna de qualquer linguagem também deixa de ser imediatamente perceptível. I'm just repeating here, in other words, what Vincent Colapietro proposed. Em suma, em suma, conforme escrevi há poucos dias, creio que a música é de fato a nossa chance de imediaticidade, pois ela desvanece no tempo, em harmonia com a qualidade de sentimento que ela produz. I'm going to read in English now because it's missing there. I believe that music, in fact, is our chance of immediacy, as it fades in time in the same harmony with the quality of feeling it produces. Obrigada.
Muito obrigado, professora Lúcia, por esse comentário tão profundo. We thank Professor Lúcia for this deep commentary. E agora passamos a palavra novamente para o professor Vincent, fazer sua colocação e também as eventuais perguntas de todos os participantes. Também convido a todos, no momento em que vamos fazer as perguntas e os comentários, abrirem as câmeras para que possamos nos ver. I now pass the stage back to Professor Vincent so that he may comment on this commentary from Professor Lúcia, and also open to other questions and comments from all of our participants, as I also invite each participant to turn on their camera.
Well, thank you so much. A deep gratitude has grown even deeper. There is a proverb in Brazil, and I won't be able to say it in Portuguese, but in effect, it is, I was going to gather the wheat, and I met someone, in this case, Professor Santaella, coming back with the loaf of bread. And so her work on music is really quite stunning. The award-winning book on matrices is a very important articulation of a theory of music, among other things, a theory of language and visual arts. But there's a later piece in which she develops this, I think, in a very powerful way in 2013 or so in Signata. And I just think that her, besides the fact that she was formally trained for about 18 years in music, and she's bringing an immense, deep familiarity of such training to her reflections on music, as well as Peirce's categories, I think she's incomparable when she writes, when she speaks on this topic. Having said that, I will just, I have an agenda. We all have an agenda, right? But I want to read Peirce, and I think that so does she, and so does Bob, and so does Professor Ivo, in a way that is decisively temporalist and historicist, and to save him from certain Kantian readings. Peirce learned a great deal from Kant. You cannot understand Peirce apart from his origins, Kant, but he transcended those origins. And so when Peirce writes things such as the object is a fragment of a history. Now, this is a surprise to some Peirce scholars, and they don't know what to do with it, but I think that we ought to know what to do with it, because history is of the most profound importance to Peirce. Temporality is of the most profound importance to Peirce. And music is time rendered audible. And I'm going to stop here because I could go on far too long. There's a wonderful poem by Borges. It's entitled Another Poem of Gifts. And it opens with, I want to give thanks to the divine labyrinth of causes and effects that form this singular universe. I want to give thanks for reason that will never give up its dream of a map of the labyrinth. And the poem concludes with the poet giving thanks for music, that mysterious form of time. And one of the paradoxes here is that the mysterium of temporality can be used to illuminate mysteries, textures of time. And so it's precisely my fascination with music, temporality, and the power of the categories to illuminate both in the interplay between temporality and music that drive me in this direction, that prompt me once again to profit from the work of Professor Santaella. And though he doesn't deal with it extensively, Bob Innes deals with it extremely insightfully. He's drawing heavily upon a book entitled Music and the Ineffable, but he's also drawing creatively and improvisationally upon that book and doing something of his own. So my approach to Peirce is one that wants to save him from certain excessively formalistic and taxonomic readings that, much like Professor Santaella, wants to highlight this sensitivity to the phenomenological dimension. And it's though phenomenology is first philosophy, it's one to which we have to return time and again. We're never done with phenomenology. At every turn, we need to be phenomenological, even in metaphysics, even in the normative sciences. So just as a way of framing. And so these issues of temporality and music as an intellectual, affective, and perceptual display of the tonalities, textures, trajectories of time is something in which I'm deeply fascinated. So we can just open it up.
Fica agora aberta as perguntas.
May I?
May I? André first.
No. Were you first?
Go ahead, André. Go ahead.
Okay. So, Vincent, I thank you for the music of ideas that we have just performed. And I'm saying that in different senses because I was wondering, were you at all listening to some kind of music while you were writing this, or was there any music playing in your mind, or which you were following the continuum? Because you talked about the continuum and how we cannot really separate it from the important mission of the continuum to actually generate discontinuities. And I think that is a most important insight, especially when talking to the mathematicians of the continuum or the analytical approach to the continuum, that as far as Peirce was concerned, especially the late Peirce, the continuum is that any particular point of the continuum is an explosion of possibilities. And that without that, the continuum would not do its mission. That if we were to think about a continuum that was pure and just pure repetition of the same without any sort of variation, it would destroy itself into its own idleness. We sometimes talk about Peirce's continuum as the third, and I think that that is not enough, that it is really a third of first as to in the contrary, because there is to it this process that I sometimes refer to. It is actually utterly indeterminate, but it is a process of determination, and it is going through determination. It can only do so through its ingrained cynicism that has to do with the actualization of possibilities, each one of which can be a surprise, and that element of surprise has to sustain the continuum as such to pursue itself.
Right. No, I think that's great. Hold on one sec. So I'm not getting paid for this, but yes, I was listening to this new cellist I've just discovered, who plays Elgar magnificently. Yes, it's so if you think about objective continua such as space and time, and Peirce writes about them specifically as objective continua, and he says space is a continuum, but it's one in which secondness happens to be somewhat predominant. So juxtaposition and clash. So the fact that something is continuous doesn't at all preclude instances or phases in which firstness or secondness might, rather than thirdness, might be the predominant feature of the continuum. So I think, and another factor here is that I like the emphasis on novelty. There's a way in which we can read Peirce's some of the historical continua as, in a sense, fatefully agonistic. And what I mean by that is they create possibilities for conflict. It's not right, and so it's not the Hegelian thing where the conflicts are necessarily resolved or overcome. It may be, but it's a universe that's much, Peirce's universe is one that's shot through with chance and contingency to a degree a Hegelian can never allow, at least consistently. So there are ways of thinking about the continuity that are really crucial. And what you said connects with my emphasis upon time not being so much a process of ceasing to be as coming to be. And it seems to me the temporal continuum is a process of generation, of surprises and novelties as much as anything else. And that has to be kept in focus.
I certainly fully agree, especially with your focus always on the heuristic power of the categories, which goes beyond the descriptive, and that the continuum is also the condition for intelligibility and cognizability.
Right. And it seems to me that what music gives us is the experience of evolving to intelligibility, where we only have very often the vaguest understanding, the most elusive comprehension of its intelligibility. But there's some inchoate, evolving intelligibility in which we're caught up. And it seems when Peirce says, thought is, we are more in thought than thought is in us, and that means we are more in signs in their process of evolution, in their process of unfolding, with all of the surprises those hold. So we are in them more than they are in us. And so we're dwelling in evolving signs, and we have a feel for this generative process of intelligibility. And music vividly allows us to experience that.
Thanks.
Professor Ivo?
Oh, yes. Oh, congratulations to the excellent paper and so clarifying commentary by Lúcia. And I know that you are a true lover of jazz music. And then I would like to listen to you about how you consider the difference between classical music, where the performers and the musicians, they are linked and forced to follow the musical score with here and there some freedom from the conductor to perform with more speed or less speed or something like that. And jazz, the performer can improvise to create different sounds, create alternative ways around the main line, the main musical line, musical theme. And so I was wondering how firstness is acting in the performer much more than in the classical music performer. I would like to, it's only a commentary, and
Right.
I'd like to listen to you about this confrontation between them.
Right. So on this point, I've been heavily influenced by two theorists, a number, but two in particular. Christopher Small, who has written a book on musicking. That's the title. Music is a verb, not a noun. And Lydia Gare, who teach and the Imaginary Museum of Musical Works. And the whole idea of a musical work is a relatively late modern conception. And so throughout the history of music, what we predominantly had were performances. And so what is to be given primacy, the score or the performance? Is the score for the sake of the performance, or is the performance principally to be judged in terms of its fidelity to the score? So you have two they're not as starkly opposed as that makes it out to be, but you have really two fundamentally different approaches to aesthetic endeavor. Now, I would step back and say music is actually in a much, so if you think about scripture, this is going to sound crazy, I understand. If you think about scripture, sacred scripture in a religious tradition, if you think about a constitution in a legal tradition, and if you think about a musical score in an aesthetic tradition, you have the literalist or the fundamentalist who demand the most exacting fidelity to the Constitution, to the Bible, to the score, to the notes as written. That, right? And then you have, in contrast, the blues jazz sensibility. Whatever is written down is for the sake of an improvisational intervention in a complex history that speaks to this moment in all of its urgency and complexity. So the part of the paradox of jazz is all these guys and women know the tradition. They're all in deep, ongoing conversation with the elders, but they're not going to play the traditional music in a traditional way. It's imperative that the spirit of innovation and improvisation drives the music in directions that are impossible to predict. So is it fidelity to the notes on the page? Or is it fidelity to the spirit that's somehow discernible in the letter, in the prior performances, in the scored, but never is content to play the notes on the page? So it's just a fundamentally different aesthetic orientation. I don't know if that.
Thank you. Okay.
To be continued.
Yeah, to be continued.
Yeah.
Professor Innes?
Yes, I was going to ask something different, but your last comment is very, very thought-provoking. I don't know how many of you know Jacques Lussier, who was trained as a classical pianist, but he did an enormous amount of recordings on of Bach, but jazzed up Bach, where Bach transformed into jazz. The Bach line is there, but it appears in the most unbelievably nuanced ways, with the intersection between his piano and the drummer and the string person. It's really quite astounding. And there it helps to identify in more detail the need for an underlying knowledge of a structure without it necessarily being a score. They obviously knew the score, right, but when they play, there's nothing in front of them, and they're not playing the same thing. As a matter of fact, there is this constant innovation and constant differentiation of their own lines, however those lines would be. But I had a question earlier on that was directed to Lúcia, but also, and since her comments were directed to you, it deals with the notion that the categories are only descriptive, and that at the same time they are the ultimate analyses of all experiences. So my question is, what is really? It's a real problem of what is the basis of the descriptions, because they seem to be, in this sense, functioning normatively. They're going to appear as aspects or dimensions of all experiences. How could you know that you have exhausted the categories unless you have another norm, another standard for determining that the experiential consequences of them correlate completely with the firstness, secondness, and thirdness? Because we obviously can redescribe the experiential nature of these categories. They seem to be correct, but that also seems to involve a stipulation of the movement from the epistemological logical order to the cosmic order, likewise, which we do find in Peirce. And I think that was partially something that was mentioned yesterday with David Dilworth's comment about the Plotinian and Neo-Plotinian aspect of the bottomless lake of consciousness, which is these aspects that permeate not just consciousness, but the universe's own development itself. So what is maybe I don't know whether Lúcia thinks it's a dumb question or how she would go about it, because it's actually true that the categories are descriptive, but it's the only that I think we would have to understand how that is the case, with us all recognizing that the triad of immediacy, resistance, and mediation seems to really cover the basic pattern that we find not just in knowledge, but in the cosmos itself.
Lúcia.
Shall I answer?
Please.
Well, as I said at the beginning, they are really descriptive. They describe all possible experiences. But that doesn't mean that we cannot take consequences from the categories. More than that, it's impossible, or at least it's not a good way to follow, to understand semiotics and metaphysics without having the basis of the categories. But I believe that they are descriptive. That's the difference between the category, between phenomenology and semiotics, because the concepts in semiotics, they are finely analytical. They are very analytical. That's it. I think that Vincent can explain better than I can. Okay.
So it seems that when we put the categories to work in the context of a theory of signs, they are descriptive in a way that invites really important analytic distinctions, right? So whether we use the word analysis or analytic doesn't seem to be important, but and your emphasis is really important, because we're describing not merely what is, but what might be. We're describing not merely actuality, but also possibilities. And we don't know if there are any experiential exemplifications, much like the periodic table, which was in part a model, right? And so we have all these various combinations of elements, some of which we know actually are instantiated or exemplified in nature, and some of which they're mere might-be's at this stage of inquiry, or they were when the periodic table was first put in place. And so you generate this vast, complex taxonomy of signs, and some of them are easily exemplified, and others, and so what would a sign of that sort look like? And it might take a long time to discover an experiential exemplification of that abstract possibility.
Yes, but we see exemplification of the categories. Once we have the set, we see them everywhere.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So, I mean, we're back to the universe is perfused with signs, and our lives are perfused with signs. So they're not predicting in that sense, but they right. are, like the periodic table says, if an element existed that would fit into this empty slot, right? This is what it would be.
Right.
So in that sense, you discover it, but you're looking for something that's unknown, but you know where it is, but you cannot find the place where it actually is located. We've located it in one sense, but we haven't found it.
Right. Yeah.
And the I think that, but the periodic table, which itself was an expression, I think, of already an intellectual sympathy that it has to be closed. It has to be filled. Nature does not exist. And there's no jumps in nature in this particular case. And in this sense, there seems to be a sense of categorical closure on Peirce's part, because it's very clear. I talked about it in the first chapter of my Consciousness in the Play of Signs book, which is on Peirce, that he says these three and no others. And then he makes the correlation between then the forms of consciousness, as we all know. I mean, this I'm not saying anything new here, but it's this notion of these and no others. There's nothing wrong with it, because it does seem to cover what he wants it to cover, and that is this great heuristic power.
But given the recursive elaboration, the open-ended recursive elaboration, when he says these three and no others, that means that they are sufficient to generate an indefinite, if not a truly infinite number of concepts that will be applicable to anything and everything. So it's not a closed system. It's it's a system that keeps on opening itself to novel possibilities, both by its own inner dunamis, its own inner logic, and by the promptings of experience. So these three and no others means that these are sufficient for an open-ended recursive system, as I read them. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I'm not making a criticism. It's not a criticism of the categories. They are obviously incredibly useful. And that's not the issue. It deals with of what they add once you have done the deeper phenomenological investigation of what is the structure of this experience of firstness, or what type of qualitative definition is found in a work of art or a piece of music. Right. What is the different feel between Jacques Lucier's performance of Bach and jazz and somebody else who's jazzed it? Right. They would have a different feel because you could identify it immediately. There's a kind of signature that determines that, and that's the concept of firstness as in its connection with quality is invaluable there.
Right.
That because it has heuristic power to force you to attend to those defining features, the difference between Bruno Walter's Mahler's Ninth Symphony and somebody else's, whatever it would be. Ivo sent me the collected symphonies of Mahler a number of years ago, and I already had some of my own. And it's fascinating, of course, as we all know, to follow these different configurations. Right. And the affective impact that they have. So, and those are instances of firstness that are appearing in this great time in motion that Zuckerkandl and the others talk about.
Right. But what I'm really fascinating by I agree with you entirely, of course. But the way in which he deploys the categories and you do and Lucia recursively, and so the firstness of firstness, the firstness of secondness, the firstness of thirdness.
Exactly.
Right. And so it's not just firstness, secondness, and thirdness. And so, and then we see in music, the firstness of secondness, the clash of sounds, right? And the firstness of thirdness, this evolving, suggestive, elusive intelligibility that's we can't keep up with, and we're just trying to comprehend, make sense. The music's helping us, but we don't make full enough sense out of it in the first hearing, the second hearing, the third hearing. Countless hearings, listenings are repaid, often very richly, because of the intricacy of the intelligibility. So for me, it's the firstness of thirdness, which is exemplified very practically in having a feel for, right? Some people, a feel for the game, a feel for a conversation, right? And so that's both firstness and thirdness. That's one of the better exemplifications I think, of what we might mean by the firstness of thirdness. There's something inarticulate about it. There's something tacit about it. And there's something really deeply attuned and intelligible about it.
I have one more question, but I don't want to take over. There must be others. So, Ryan, you could call on whoever you need.
I wanted to add to this that when Peirce extended the categories from thought or logic to nature, he is moving them to the universe. And I'm sure the categories are not busy describing the universe. They are at work within the universe. When Peirce extends that even to the origin of the universe, one must think their heuristic power is such because they are in tune with what they are doing within nature. and I would not simply put the categories on the side of the philosopher doing phenomenological work, Peirce puts them squarely within nature as such.
I'm going to piggyback on that too and just say that's been on the back of my head this whole time, Andre. Thanks for mentioning that. But just a piggyback, you could think of it this way. Even if you take to the phenomenological approach, where the categories are intended to be descriptive of experience, well, if they're correct descriptions, then they're not just merely descriptive. Right? There's something inherent in experience that is categorically real. I wanted to ask Vincent just a quick question. This is gonna go back to a minor point when you brought up Herbert Schneider and how he called the categories playful and I think experimental. Was it? Yeah, okay. Well, for Peirce, those are hardly critical terms, right? So was Schneider being critical, or was he pointing out that, you know, they have that heuristic play in terms of amusement and experimental in terms of the scientific process?
No, he was no. I read that too quickly. No, he intended that. I think he's right. I think he's right descriptively. That there are times when Peirce is playful, and he's very explicit about, in the lectures on pragmatism being one of the places where he's rather dramatic, right? A sense of fun helps thought and keeps it pragmatical. So, being playful, to say that a philosopher is playful descriptively, that's fine, but then to have this audible tone of criticism, or to say that the categories they're at best experimental, well, Peirce is a radical experimentalist. You could not give him a higher compliment than to say his categories are at bottom experimental, right? They couldn't be anything else. They can't be. They can't be deduced, or derived in some kind of apodictic a priori fashion. Of course, there are formal considerations and a priori, but ultimately, it's an experiment. It has the categories themselves are an experimental framework rooted in a lifetime of experimenting with categorical reflection. They are experimental. They can't be apodictically certain. He's not a Cartesian, and in this respect, he's not a Kantian.
Yeah, that's such a strange remark by Schneider. I guess that's where he was coming from, though, like that they were not a priori, and that was a problem or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that just suggests a stranglehold of a certain kind of reading of Peirce.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Perceivo.
No, I'll let my question, my observation for another occasion, because I'm worried with the time, and the next session will start at 4, if I'm not wrong. But only a little observation about the categories. I think that if you consider the categories as descriptive or normative, you will transform them as a theoretical model to read something. And actually, my point of view is that phenomenologically, the categories are modes of being, or classes of our experience, and they are modes of being of our experience. So they first intended to classify our real experience of phenomena in 3 classes. It's not only a description or a theoretical model to read something, but they are acting in as our experience. On the other hand, they are modes of being of reality, independent of us. This is the metaphysical hypothesis of Peirce's metaphysical hypothesis. They are also acting as modes of being of reality, as well as classes of on how we experience reality in three ways. So I agree with the observation of Andre and also with Nick. So I think that we need to consider Peirce's realism. Realism imposes this kind of symmetry between phenomenology and ontology regarding the categories. It's only an observation.
That's absolutely right. It seems to me that they are descriptive of ubiquitous features of phenomena, but then the pragmatic dimension, they're descriptions in the service of inquiry. So they have they're just phenomenological descriptions that are ultimately have a heuristic purpose. They're to guide and goad inquiry, and they are to guide and goad inquiry in any domain of investigation whatsoever, including ontology and cosmology, and therefore they lead to the three modes of being. So they ultimately evolve into distinctively ontological and cosmological categories. So one can emphasize the categories as descriptions in the service of investigation, but not stop there, go exactly to the heart of Peirce's realism and say they ultimately, as he used them and as he wanted them to be used, they have ontological and cosmological implications. I think you have to say all of that, and that means realism. Yep. So but he's going to do it methodically, right? He's not going to start with them as ontological or cosmological. He's going to, it's the third branch of philosophy. He's going to arrive there. He's going to arrive there via phenomenology and normativity.
Okay, time is going.
Time is over. We're up.
I think I don't know if the next session is at 4. I'm a bit worried with this. It's only 2 minutes to 4.
It should be at 3:45. We are delayed.
We are delayed. So Ítala is here. Ítala is the coordinator of the roundtable. So we are somehow delayed. My suggestion is to finish. Nevertheless, this it's so rich discussion. Maybe we can continue in another opportunity. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Vincent, and everybody. That was really great.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Nick.
O Ryan fica na mesma sala, né? Creio. Né? Luísa?
Isso. Permanecemos.
Quem coordena a sessão agora é a professora Ítala, né?
Mas é a mesma sala, ficamos aqui.
É a mesma sala.
Ah, perfeito.
Boa tarde, Ítala, tudo bem?
Where is the Colombian embassy?
Hi. We are here.
Francisco Vargas.
Yeah.
How are you?
Fine. What about you?
Welcome to the conference. Fernando, good to see you.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Ítala might not know that she's muted.
I'm mute. Hello to everybody. Francisco, Arnold, Gustavo y Fernando. Debíamos estar hablando desde las 2:30 por orientación de la comisión organizadora, pero no logramos encontrarnos. ¿Ustedes piensan proyectar algo?
Yes, so we will be projecting. Each of us will be projecting.
We could try.
We need that the organizer put us as co-hosts.
Yes. The organizer, who is the responsible?
Olá, Ítala.
Oi, Luísa. Para ele
Tudo bem?
explicar, ele quer tentar compartilhar, projetar.
Vou
Ver se
abrir
funciona.
You have to put Zalamea, Osta, and Vargas in the co-host modality so we can project.
Ok, eu vou torná-los co-anfitriões.
That's it. Thank you.
Só um minutinho. Não sou eu que estou como anfitriã da sala aqui. Deixa eu ver se é a Lúcia que está. Não estou conseguindo.
It must be, yes, I see that the host is Lucia Dantas, so it's Lucia that has to put us as co-hosts. She has the
Yes.
ability. She's the only one capable to do that.
Eu já chamei ela aqui.
Mas já conseguiu compartilhar.
Ah, já conseguiu compartilhar?
Já
Yes,
conseguiu.
I was trying. I'm able now to share. So I will stop.
So you were able to share even you are not the co-host, Francisco?
I was able a moment
Okay.
ago to share. Why don't you try?
Okay, I will try. Yeah, it works.
Ok.
So we don't need to be co-hosts then. That's perfect. So whenever you want, Ítala.
Bueno, could we begin?
Acho que podemos começar aí.
Podemos começar?
Acho que sim,
Alguém
Ítala, pode
precisa
começar.
Bom,
precisa
então
gravar, né? Só desculpe.
nós temos 20 minutos atrasados, de acordo com o horário original.
A gravação continua.
20 minutes delayed. And so I have to change the end of the table. We will finish at 6, at 6:05, okay?
Ok.
Good afternoon here in Brazil. It's a pleasure to be the coordinator of this roundtable at the famous and well-known pragmatism meeting organized by Ivo Ibre and his colleagues and collaborators at the Pontifícia Universidade Católica de São Paulo, Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo. Now we are going to have a round table under the responsibility of the Sociedad Lationoamericana Peirce. The title of the round table is Advances in Peirce Mathematics, the Colombian School. Nossa Mesa-redonda, sob responsabilidade é uma mesa da Sociedad Lationoamericana Peirce. O título da mesa é Avanços na Matemática de Peirce, a escola colombiana. Esta mesa tem como foco a matemática de Peirce, como estudada pela escola colombiana, e ela anuncia uma publicação que deve sair em breve pela De Gruyter. The Roundtable focuses on Peirce's mathematics, studied technically by the Colombian School, and published in an upcoming book by De Gruyter. The three main topics concerned are as follows. The first, formal axiomatization of Peirce's pragmaticist maxim, using sophisticated ideas, arguments, and variations of the machinery of category theory. Second, the first full modelization of Peirce's continuum, which includes in a single model the generic, reflexive, supermultitudinal, and modal characters of the continuum, using in its construction the full range of ordinals in Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory. And third, the first formal proofs for intuitionistic existential graphs and the first extensions of Peirce's graphs to non-planar surfaces, sphere, torus, cylinder, Möbius strip, combining diagrammatization, algebraization, and linearization to obtain a full range of completeness theorems for numerous non-classical logics. Finally, a compact and synthetic view of these advances is presented along a conceptual Riemann surface. So this roundtable here bringing the Colombian school, the Persian Colombian school, will present us very creative and original approaches and results. The participants are Professor Fernando Zalamea, professor at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, Bogotá, Professor Gustavo Arengas, instructor at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, Francisco Vargas, professor of mathematics at the UNAD, Open and Distance National University, and Arnold Ostra, professor of mathematics at the Universidad del Tolima, Ibagué. We will begin with Professor Fernando Zalamea. It's an honor for me to introduce Professor Zalamea. His PhD in mathematics was obtained at the University of Massachusetts. He is professor at the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, Bogotá, since 1991. He has worked in categorical logic, non-classical logics, and the history and philosophy of mathematics. His main expertise have evolved around Charles Peirce, Lautmann, and Grothendieck. He has been co-editor of the journal Quadernos de Sistemática Peirceana, and his most relevant books include Peirce's Logic of Continuity, published in 2012, and Synthetic Philosophy of Contemporary Mathematics, 2009. And I'm very honored to announce that Professor Fernando Zalamea will be at Unicamp next February. He will give a course on the philosophy of mathematics during the special São Paulo School of Advanced Science on Contemporary Logic that will be held at Unicamp next February. And so, Professor Zalamea, please, you could begin.
Thank you very much, Professor Ottaviano, for the moderation and for the gentle introduction for our roundtable. Thank you very much, Professor Ivo Iberi, for the invitation to participate in this 21st International Meeting on Pragmatism. Thanks to Professor Kathy Hines for the sponsorship of this space under the Sociedad Lationoamericana Peirce, and of course, thanks again, Professor Ottaviano, for the kind moderation. So we will present in this roundtable the following book, which has been just published by the Gruyter. It's a compilation of several advances in what we have called, for short, advances in Persian mathematics. It should be perhaps read as advances in mathematics related to Peirce, but it was simpler to put it in this way. So thanks again here for the editors of this beautiful series of the Gruyter, the Persiana, to Arti Pietarinen and Francisco Bellucci, to Mara Weber for the overall edition of the volume, and especially to Jukka Nikulainen for the extraordinary typesetting of the final manuscript. We will then resume in a very short way the contents of this volume. This volume is essentially produced by three of my students in some moment in my life, by Gustavo Arengas, Francisco Vargas, and Arnoldo Ostra. Arengas has produced something very special. I will, in this slide, just indicate very briefly what are the problems which were addressed by these magnificent scholars. The problem by Arengas was to mathematize the pragmatic maxim, that is to introduce sound definitions in order to produce a proof of the pragmaticist maxim. That is something which was very important for Peirce. Peirce always insisted in the proof of pragmatism. But to produce a real proof, you have to introduce mathematics, and then you have to introduce good definitions. So Arengas had the ability to introduce good definitions to address this first problem, how to mathematize the pragmatic maxim in order to produce it as a theorem in a system. Then Francisco Vargas addressed another of the big problems of the Persian architectonics, the problem of the continuum. You know, perhaps that the continuum was a kind of the fundamental perspective for Peirce in the Colapietro conference before. You say it was explicit several times that the continuum was one of the main tools for understanding Peirce and for understanding the world. So the continuum is still one of the main ingredients in the architectonics, and the problem was to produce a sound model for this continuum. For years, for a century, it was more or less intended that the problem had no real solution. The problem was just a philosophical problem. But Vargas then produced an incredibly simple and profound solution, and he has produced a model for the continuum which is mathematically complete and sound, with very precise definitions that he will explain in a moment. And Arnoldo Ostra addressed another of the main important problems of Peirce, which was to understand in a sound and profound way the logic of the continuum. What is the topological logic beyond the continuum? You know that Peirce invented the existential graphs in order to produce also a kind of approach to the proof of pragmatism. And he was very interested in the use of those existential graphs. With time, the existential graphs were formed as a very sound and consistent way to express several different perspectives for logic. propositional calculus to first order logic, to modal logics, to superior order logics of higher order. And then the existential graphs are really a sound and very important part of the architectonics. To introduce in a natural way the logic which is closer to topology, which is the intuitionistic logic, was the feature of Arnold Ostra's perspective. He introduced and invented the existential graphs for intuitionism with a very simple also approach, and developed the full complete proofs of that the intuitionistic existential graphs are sound enough to capture intuitionistic logic. So those are the main problems addressed here: the pragmatic maxim, the continuum, and the existential graphs. And the solutions were incredibly simple and profound. So I will explain them in very short words, and then each of them will develop this with enough time. So Arengas introduced the category theory, some tools from category theory to produce a good back and forth between the idea of that the sign is captured completely by the modal representations of the sign. And the usual pragmatic maxim is that you have the sign and the representations of the sign approach the original sign. Here, if you introduce modality, the pragmatism maxim says that the sign will be captured, but all enough representations in all modal possible contexts. So this can be represented very well with category theory. Category theory and several tools natural in category theory, like adjunctions, monads, and descent theory. Arengas introduced the definitions and produced the several proofs of the pragmatism maxim. So the pragmatism maxim is now a theorem of a system. It's not just a good ideal, an ideal in the sense of Peirce, of the summum bonum. We want to approach the ideal, but it is in fact now a theorem in a system. And in fact, we have several ways of expressing that theorem in several systems, and Arengas produced proofs of them all. Then Vargas introduced a very natural way to complete the continuum. You remember that for Peirce, Cantor's continuum was just the first embryo of continuity. Vargas completed that idea and iterated the continuum a lot of times using all the richness of Zermelo-Fraenkel theory on all the richness of ordinals, and iterated the basic real line over all the ordinals, and then produced something very important that he will explain to you in a moment: the inversion of the relation of pertinence. And in that inversion and that iteration of the real line, he was able to produce a model which has all the important properties of the continuum. It's gigantic. It's a very, very big model. It's a model which has no points. It's a model which reflects itself in each level, in each monad. It's a very rich model which is mathematically sound now, and which possesses all the properties of Peirce's continuum. Ostra introduced then to produce new models for existential graphs, to extend existential graphs to intuitionistic logic, to modal logics, and to new logics which extend the plane, what are called the non-planar surfaces. The usual existential graphs are produced on a plane. Austria invented the extensions of the existential graphs beyond the plane, and then he proved sound and complete theorems for each of these extensions, just with the introduction, with a very simple sign that he will show to you in a moment. To motivate a little these constructions, I will be finishing very soon. We can see, for example, in this de Moivre's formula, something which is very dear to Peirce, the combination of syntaxis, pragmatics, and semantics. In the de Moivre's formula that you can see there, you can see a syntaxis which is produced by cosinus phi plus sinus phi, the pragmatics, which is the multiplication, the action of this syntaxis. And from there, you get a new expression in which you have changed completely the angles. So there has been some new semantics which appears in the construction. If we make a kind of metaphoric way, the pragmatic maxim has to do in part, in most part with syntaxis, the existential graphs in most part with the pragmatics, with the new rules that are extended to capture the logics, and the Peirce's continuum has to do with new semantics, new models that are produced to understand our continuity. And a special case of this beautiful de Moivre's formula is the famous Euler's equation, EI to the pi plus 1 equals 0. This is one of the most beautiful mathematical equations produced. And in there, if you can see, if you follow my syntaxis, pragmatics, and semantics reading, you can see that from 1, you get to see from the unity, you get to the void, using just transcendentals twice and the imaginary. From the unity going to the imagination and enough transcendentals, and you get to the void. So there is something very special in this equation, which can be in a sense related to this kind of complete syntaxis, pragmatics, and semantics weighting of Peirce. And another way to render these readings are through Riemann surfaces, in which in the Riemann surfaces, in the various labels of the Riemann surfaces, you can put to action the works of Arengas, Vargas, and Ostra. This has been done by another of my students, and you get my youngest student here. I have had the chance to have 4 generations of students here, first Ostra, then Vargas, then Arengas, and now Huguet. And each of them has produced beautiful things. Huguet has produced beautiful renderings of the different basic gestures of each of these constructions. We will come back to them if we have time at the end in the discussion. So without further ado, I leave here my brief presentation, and we can continue with more time afterwards, and we can continue with more precision now with the constructors of these basic and fundamental ideas, Arengas, Vargas, and Ostra. We will see if Arengas has arrived. If not, we can continue with Vargas. I think that Gustavo is not here.
Okay.
So we can continue with Francisco Vargas.
Thank you, Fernando. Now we continue with Gustavo Arengas.
I think, Professor Taviano, I think that Gustavo is not here, so it should be Francisco.
Gustavo is not here?
I don't see him.
Okay. So we have to continue with Francisco Vargas?
That's okay.
Okay, Francisco, you're welcome. Francisco Vargas is PhD in Mathematics Education by Ludwigsburg University, Germany, and nowadays he's professor of mathematics at the Unad, Open and Distance National University. His research focuses on the interaction between logic, the philosophy of mathematics, the psychology of reasoning, and mathematics education. Some recent publications include The Peirce Continuum, together with Matthew Moore, published in 2021, and Communication Goals and Counterexamples in Syllogistic Reasoning, published in 2020, together with Keith Stenning. Okay, Francisco.
Thank you, Professor D'Ottaviano. So, okay, let me start with this Persian manuscript of this labyrinth, which reminds us the Leibniz expression about the continuum, the labyrinth of the continuum. So we'll come back to Leibniz later in my exposition. One moment. Okay, let me take a pointer. Okay, in my exposition, I will follow the same order as in my chapter. So that's the content of my chapter. So I first start by exposing in some detail what Peirce said about the continuum, his different approaches to the problem. So that's the first part. And then I address the problem of modeling these ideas with a set theoretical construction, which I will show next. So that's the start of the chapter. This was already published before in some other publications, the one you mentioned before. But the idea in this chapter, the new part, is to explore new directions using this construction, this model, in different directions of mathematics. So I think the importance is to show that this construction is not just something of interest for Persian scholars, but also that more generally we can develop mathematics inside the model and address different mathematical constructions, so develop mathematics there. So I address I take several views. First, a mereological view, which I will address briefly now. A Kripke model view, an algebraic view, a geometric view, and finally I develop a version of infinitesimal calculus using this continuum. So let me very briefly recall some of the ideas that Peirce expressed about the continuum. We have reflexibility and inextensibility. Reflexibility is this idea that any part of the continuum, however small, itself has parts of the same kind. So every part of the surface is a surface, and every part of a line is a line. That's reflexibility. So this self-mirroring property. And we have also that the point of time or space is nothing but ideal limit. So points really don't exist. We have a completely different view of geometry than the usual one. This is at the antipodes of the Euclidean view, in which space and the line are composed out of points, conceived as indivisible parts. That's the definition that Euclid gave of a point. This point is something that has not any part. So it's at the opposite of the Euclidean vision, at the opposite of the usual construction of the continuum, which is the real numbers. Real numbers, of course, are just many numbers, points put together. So his idea was completely different in this. So that's the core of the idea, the Peircean idea of the continuum. We have also some other properties. He insisted that the continuum has a modal character. It is a potential aggregate. So he said that given any collection of distinct individuals whatsoever, out of that potential aggregate, there may be actualized a more multitudinous collection of than the given collection. So this potential character is intertwined with the idea of super multitudinous, which means that is of a higher degree of any infinite cardinal. So of course, Peirce adopts the Cantorian theory of sets of transfinite cardinals, and he conceived the continuum as being somehow transcendent of any fixed cardinal. This, again, is very different from the usual conception of the continuum. The reals are a set, and as a set, they have a definite cardinal, which is the cardinal of what is called the continuum, usually, in the standard view. So these are the main characteristics of Peircean continuum, and we try now to address how to give a construction that incarnates them. So how to address the problem? Peirce himself gives us some hints about this. He says that the real numbers are an embryo of continuity that somehow should be enriched to obtain real continuity. So we will start with the real numbers, with the real line. So this is just the first step of the construction. And what we do is look at each of the points of the real line and see it as having inside a whole copy of the line. So we kind of explode each of these points, and inside it we have a copy of the real numbers. But we don't stop there. We see all the obtained points in this way, and we again explode them, and we obtain another layer in the construction, and so on and so forth. So here I just, you can see just 3 levels of the construction, but the idea is to continue it again and again all over the whole scale of ordinals. So we take all the transfinite, finite and transfinite Cantorian ordinals, which is a proper class, and we iterate this construction all over this scale of ordinals. So that's why it's called C-ord. So it's a continuum of order ord, meaning the proper class of all the ordinals. So it's, as Fernando said before, a huge construction, which is not even a set. It's developed in set theory, in a set theoretical framework, but what we obtain at the end is not even a set, it's a proper class, because we carry on the construction all over the ordinals, which is a proper class in itself. So the construction is done by simply by ordinal recursion or induction. So that's all. Is, as Fernando said, a very simple idea, but which allows us to obtain the different properties I mentioned before. So what we have is a layered vision of continuity. We have different levels, C alpha for each ordinal alpha, and what we do is taking the union of these all these sets, obtaining a proper class. Okay, so let me continue. we obtain, of course, in this way, the supermultitudinous property, because it's a proper class, so it's beyond any fixed infinite cardinal. And we obtain this modal character. If we have a collection of points, we can obtain even more and more and more in a potential way. But the key property here is reflexivity, which is obtained because we can look at each point x, what is below that point. What is below that point is what I call a monad, the monad mx. Let me change the color here. So what is in blue is what is below the point x. Let me take as x, for instance, this point. What is below it is all this class, and that is isomorphic to the whole green class, which is the whole model. So that's the way we obtain this self-mirroring property, which is, I think, the more characteristic property of Peircean continuum. And before continuing, yeah. So we obtain.
Francisco, sorry, could you explain? I didn't understand what's mx.
Mx is what is below the point x. So you have the x, and what is below it is the monad inside x.
Generated by it.
Yeah, here we talk about monads, of course, a Leibniz expression, but in a different way from non-standard analysis. In non-standard analysis, you have just a linear order.
Yeah.
So a monad was infinitesimally close to that to a given point. Here, the idea is different. Here is what is inside that point.
Yes.
It's not what is around, but what is inside. So what is here below that point. So that's the monad. Okay, thanks. Okay, so that's the construction, and as I mentioned, we obtained the main properties I mentioned before, and we, of course, sorry, I come back. Being reflexive, we don't have points, so it's inextensible in the sense of Peirce. We don't have ultimate constituents, but inside any place, we have more and more and more parts. We don't have ultimate parts, which are the points. Sometimes I talk about points, but they are not really points. They are monads in reality. Okay, so now let us see some of the connections with other fields of mathematics. There's a very natural connection with the ideas of Alfred North Whitehead. His philosophical ideas about physics and reality. He talked usually about time and duration. So it's also a view in which realities are extended and not constituted by points. So that's why he talked about duration and extended realities with no atomic structure, no points, and with a potential character. So they are very close in many of the expressions about the continuum. And in fact, out of the Whitehead ideas, it has been developed a whole field in geometry, which is called pointless geometry. It's developed mostly by the Italian School of Geometry. And they axiomatize the notion of Whitehead inclusion space. And one of the things I prove in the chapter is that the construction of the Peircean model I construct satisfies these axioms. So it's as should be a very natural result. So that's one of the theorems I proved. If we take the subsets of the model, we obtain a Whitehead inclusion space. Okay, so that's one of the connections. Another connection is trying to explore this modal character of the continuum. A natural way to do that is using Kripke models, because Kripke models are a natural semantics for modal logics. So we can see the model as a Kripke model with the ordinals as the possible words, and the construction up to each level as the models at each point. That way, we have a formalization of the Peircean idea that we have at each word, at each stage, we have potentially the possibility of realizing more and more elements. So that's the main idea, to formalize this notion of the potential character of the continuum. And we obtain, as usually with Kripke models, the failure of the principle of excluded middle, which is also an idea developed by Peirce. Is very famous, his example about a spot of ink in the plane. If you ask about a point in the boundary between the spot and the paper, and the white paper, you have no reason to say that that point on the boundary is either black or white. So we have the failure of bivalence. So the same holds for some statements in the Kripke model I define. I showed some examples of this failure. Okay, another direction is, of course, to try to develop geometry. So for doing that, we need to define the plane and multidimensional spaces. So there are several approaches to this, which I used two, which turn out to be equivalent. I will not enter into the details, but the important thing is that we can think also in the plane in the same way we did for the line. And for any point of the real plane, for the Cartesian plane, we can see it as having inside a whole copy of the plane, which was the idea of Peirce, which I mentioned, I read before. So we can do that, and inside this point, we have a whole copy of the plane, and inside each point there, another copy of the plane, and so on and so forth, all through the whole class of the ordinals. So we can do these iterations also here. And having the plane, of course, we can develop geometry and calculus, try to develop mathematics inside these spaces. But for doing that, we did some algebraic tools. So that can be done, addressed using the structure of the reals. What we are taking in the model are series of real numbers. So we can, so the model inherits an algebraic structure from the reals themselves. So we can define additions straightforwardly with component-wise, and we can define also a notion of product. The product can be defined, needs some work to define it, but it can be seen simply as a generalization of the product of polynomials in one variable. So you define this product, and you have a good behavior. It distributes with the addition, it's commutative. So we obtain at the end a ring structure with these sequences of real numbers, and with that you can develop some geometry, some algebraic geometry, because you have these algebraic tools. You can define geometric entities out of equations. And you can also define functions with these equations, and you can develop approach calculus in using infinitesimals. What we have exploding each of these points and looking inside the monad is that you obtain infinitesimals. So we can develop also calculus in a way very close to the historic foundations of the subject. So as Leibniz approached the subject. What we obtain is that for functions defined by equations, we have that they have this property of microstraightness. What does it mean? It means that if we take, for instance, this parabola, and you take a point on the curve, in reality it's not a point, we know, and we look inside it, you have a copy of the plane of the Cartesian product of the reals, you have a copy of the plane, and in that plane, the curve is a straight line. So it's not that I'm postulating that it is a straight line. It's something that you obtain out of the definition of the product and the sum. So so you obtain for free that a notion of differentiability of a tangent in a point without needing any use of limits, which is the usual difficult point in starting calculus. We don't need limits at all. We just need to know how to multiply. So you obtain that the parabola is composed by all these straight parts, which is very, very close also to how calculus started. Some mathematicians of the 17th century, as Isaac Barrow, for instance, talk about timelets and linelets as composing the curves they used to work with. So that's something that we obtain here in the model. And using also the same kind of ideas, the same kind of infinitesimal ideas, we can define the notion of the area below a function, and we obtain a version of the fundamental theorem of calculus. Here you have the Leibniz manuscript, original manuscript. So the idea of using infinitesimals, it's in Latin, and I will not read it, but he's using infinitesimals in order to define the notion of derivative and integrals, and somehow seeing that one is the opposite operation of the other one. So that's what we obtain here. So it's the theorem 2.19. Moment. I cannot write. Okay. So we have this equation, which is saying that this function, which is the area below the function f, if we perform the derivative, you obtain the original functions. So that can be shown also in this framework using this microstraightness principle I already described. So so that's what is new in this chapter, different directions. I think there are many open problems, a lot of directions to explore. This is, I think, just a start of what could be done in this framework. But up to this point, what can we see is that many of the ideas Peirce developed converge. So we not only have a consistent way to think about his ideas of the continuum, but also we obtain a calculus and analysis developed out of infinitesimals in the same model. As you know, Peirce very strongly advocated for the use of infinitesimals in calculus against the mainstream direction of his time, mathematics. He was, I think, one of the only ones who defended infinitesimals at the end of the 19th century, after Weierstrass and Cauchy works. Okay. So these are the main works. That's the first publication of the model in Spanish. That's the first chapter where I presented the model in English. This is the inspiring work from Fernando Zalamea, of course. And thank you. Obrigado.
Gracias, Francisco.
Okay.
Thank you. Now we continue with Arnold Ostra. Arnold. Okay. Arnold, hello. Received his PhD in mathematics from the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, Bogotá. He is professor of mathematics at the Universidad del Tolima, Ibagué, since 1996. His areas of interest are the interactions between logic and algebra and the mathematics of Charles Peirce, especially his existential graphs. He has been co-editor of the journal Quadernos de Sistemática Peirceana, and his most relevant papers include Los gráficos alfa de Peirce aplicados à la lógica intuicionista, published in 2010, and Existential Graphs on Non-Planar Surfaces, published in 2019. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Ottaviano, for this nice presentation. And
nice to see you.
Thank you. Also very nice to meet you. Thank you, everybody, for being here in this afternoon. And special thanks to Professor Ivo Ibri for the organization of this nice meeting, and to all his collaborators in this Encuentro Internacional sobre Pragmatismo. And thank you for your invitation to this meeting. My part of this roundtable is just an outline of the third chapter of the book. This is the general outline. I will not go into all the details, but just talk about what are the main ideas in this chapter, so you can later look at the details and read the whole book. The first chapter, the first part of this chapter, the first section, is just a presentation of existential graphs in Peirce style. Of course, it is a modern rendering, complete rendering as we have come to it in our presentations, in our time, but it is just exactly the Peirce's existential graphs, original as he taught them, and in their three presentations. Let's go ahead. It doesn't work. Okay. The first part are the alpha graphs. The alpha graphs, always existential graphs, are constructed upon a sheet, a surface, and Peirce calls it a sheet of assertion. And there we put the propositional sentences. And also we can write different sentences on the sheet of assertion, and we can also enclose graphs or sentences with a closed curve, which Peirce called a cut. It is a cut upon the sheet of assertion, and it always encloses something. In this way, we can the interpretation, the basic interpretation of these graphs are that when we write something on the sheet of assertion, then we are asserting it. It is affirmation. So if we write two things, we have conjunction automatically. And also the enclosing means the negation of what is inside the cut. So we have automatically negation. So we have conjunction and negation. And with these two connectives, of course, we can write every logical formula. These are the basic representations of the junction. By De Morgan law, we can think this is the negation, it is not true that not A and not B, so some of the two has to be true. And here in the below is the implication. It is not true that it is not true that A is true and B is false. So we have that always A implies B. This is the basic graph for the implication. And so we can draw every logical formula, propositional logical formula, we can make a nice drawing, but that is not the interesting point. The interesting point are rules of transformation that Peirce proposed. And basically there are 5 rules of transformation. These are erasure, insertion, erasure in even. So even means evenly enclosed area. In an evenly enclosed area, there are an even number of cuts around this area, like this letter C here. There are 2 cuts around it, so we can erase letter C, or we could erase letter B. The other way around, on the odd areas, and there are an odd number of cuts around it, we can write anything there. Insertion in odd. Iteration is the most important rule of Peirce. We can iterate to the inside. There always are inside and outside in the graphs. And we can always iterate to the inside, and we can de-iterate from the outside. This word exists not, Peirce invented it. We can uncopy from the outside. And also double cut, of course, if one cut is a negation and double cut, nothing between them is not, and in logic you can say that it is yes. So double cut, you can erase double cut and leaving the inside, or you can write a double cut around the graph, and the graph is there. With these rules you can do all propositional logic. This is just an example of how to prove modus ponens. Here we say A is true and A implies B is true, and so we can de-iterate B by the 4th rule, and by the 5th rule we can erase this double cut, and by the 1st rule we can erase letter A, and then we have conclusion B, and of course we could find any other conclusion. And in fact, every deduction in propositional logic is possible with this very simple graphical system. The heart of Peirce's existential graphs is system beta. In system beta, we start with a new element. A new element is the line of identity of on the sheet. The line of identity represents a subject. When we draw a line on the sheet of assertion, then we are asserting there exists some subject, somebody, someone, something exists. On the ends of the line, we can write propositions or things we want to say about the subject. And of course, subjects can connect, and then we have binary relations, and we have whatever you want. The logic of relations represented by lines. That was a very nice idea by Peirce, and so this graph represents that there exists something that is S and P, and some S are P or some P are S, just what you want. And you can combine this with the cut with the negation, and that is very nice because you can combine it in very different ways. You can negate everything, then no S is P, or you can just negate one of the proposition, one of the relation, and some S is not P, or you can negate that, and then we have all S are P, and then we have the nice for proposition of Aristotelian logic. But of course, we have many more graphics of relation. You can draw any sentence in first order logic with relation, with equality. You can draw with this with this system, in this system. Again, interesting feature is not what you can draw, but what you can transform. They are the same 5 rules. Is very, very interesting that they are exactly the same 5 rules, but now they are applied to the line. Like in even, you can cut the line, you can erase a part of the line, and so you can cut the line in 2, or in an odd area, you can connect 2 lines and identify 2 subjects, and then you have the line of identity. It is just identical the one to the other, and you can iterate to the inside and iterate from the outside, and it's very nice because it looks like a fishing line. And the double cut, if the line traverses the 2 cuts, then you can add it or remove a double cut. Here is a nice beta proof. This is the famous celebrated syllogism. All human beings are mortal, and Socrates is a human being. Thus, then, and what can we say? Now we can iterate the line to the inside. This is just a case of iteration. Now we are in an odd area where I connected 2 lines, and then we have then we were speaking about the same human being. The same human from the outside is from the inside. It is identified. So we can iterate the information that is in the inside. And now we have a double cut. Double cut, you can erase it. And now we have a nice subject that is called Socrates, and which is a human being and which is mortal. But we already knew that he is human, so we just erase this information and forget it, and Socrates is mortal. Of course, very nice. And so all syllogisms, but not only all syllogisms, but everything in first order logic, you can prove it in a graphical way. Is just different from axioms or from semantics. Peirce experimented many years with his graphs, and one of these ideas was what happens if the cut is not continuous, because we have a broken cut. This is an idea from Peirce, and he interpreted this. If a continuous cut is not, then it is possibly not, maybe not. So we have the possibly logics, and then we can also combine. If we negate it, it is possibly not. It is not true that it's possibly not OA, so it is necessarily OA, and it is possibly A, and here we have an A is impossible, and we can go on and on and on to put more and more and more, and this is very nice exercise. Again, the rules of transformation. Peirce proposed only for, in this case, only erasure insertion, and in some manuscript we can deduce he proposed this writing of an empty double cut. The empty double cut corresponds to the rule of necessitation, which is an idea from Aristotle, and the other 2 are permits us to prove some basic modal ideas. At this point, in Peirce's time, the modal logic was not formalized. Was not formalized yet. 60 years later, Seaman already was an expert in modal logics, so he proposed some rules of iteration and the iteration for these graphs, and we had logics for, we had existential graphs for 3 modal logics, S4, S4.2, and S5. That is the standard version of existential graphs, and that is what we find in the first chapter. Of course, there are more details. There are some more details in this book. You will find alpha decision methods, also invented by Peirce, and written in this new presentation. There is a formal definition of alpha graphs as mathematical objects, just as a equivalence class of isotopy classes, etc. And we have also a formal equivalence proof between these alpha graphs and propositional logic, formal with axioms and so on. And this equivalence proof in a modern presentation. So this chapter has all these features about the original Peirce's existential graphs. The second part of this chapter introduces our intuitionistic existential graphs. This part is these graphs are part of a huge project. The project is, since the 20th century, there are many logics different from the classical logics, non-classical logics, intuitionistic logic, modal logic, paraconsistent logic, multivalued logic, fuzzy logic, so on and so on and so on. There's tens of thousands of different logics that are not classical. The question is if for some of them logic, or for all of these logics, or for the majority of these logics, there could be systems of existential graphs like Peirce's. Why? Because they are very nice. Because this is a new way to do logic. It is not with algebraic formulas, it is with drawings. Can we do mathematics with drawings? We are convinced that the answer is yes. And then we have to propose existential graphs for non-classical logics. And the first case was intuitionistic logic. That was because Fernando Zalamea always suggested this could be done. He was convinced that intuitionistic logic should have existential graphs. Why? Because intuitionistic logic is very close to topology. Historically and everything, it is very close to topology. And topology, well, existential graphs are graphical, are topological, is topological logic. So from existential graphs to intuitionistic logic, there should be a direct connection. Okay, this is right. What is intuitionistic logic? This was introduced by Hayting in 1929 as a formal model for intuitionistic mathematics, which is another story which I will not enter now. These axioms are equivalent to Hayting axioms. The only difference with classical logic is that there is no negation. There is no axiom for negation. These are Hilbert axioms for classical logic, but the third axiom of Hilbert we change with this, and this is the principle of explosion from absurd, this T upside down, T is absurd false, implies everything, this principle of explosion, and there is no negation, no problem. The only rule is modus ponens, of course, and negation is defined in this way. Now why appears there the spirit of Peirce? Because Peirce in 85 already brought in his axioms, he defined the negation in this way. He defined the negation exactly in this way, and he defined this object as something that implies everything. So Peirce was anticipating this intuitionistic negation by decades. Now you can prove a lot of things, and the interesting things is what you cannot prove in intuitionistic logic, and you cannot prove the excluded middle. You cannot prove this direction of double negation. The other way you do. And then you think that because you only change the axiom of negation, then you can then everything stops at negation. Now it has consequences on the other connectives. The other connectives also explode in intuitionistic logic. You cannot define A or B in terms of implication and negation as you do classically. You cannot define implication, the last line here at the right below. You cannot define implication in terms of negation and conjunction as you do classically and as we used for the existential graphs. So in intuitionistic logic, the connectives are completely independent one of another. No, the Morgan laws, everything. So now, how can you say that it is not, you are not able to prove this? For this, we need, of course, semantics. That is the way, these are syntax for the logic. Now we need semantics. The basic semantic, one of the nice semantics for intuitionistic logic are the hating algebras. Hating algebras is a lattice. Hating algebras is a lattice, excuse me. It's a lattice with minimum and with an operation, a row operation, with this connection, with this, which satisfies this equivalence. So in a hating algebra, we have independently a meet, a join, implication, and a maximum and a minimum, everything. Okay. Under here, excuse me. Now we define there is no complement. We can almost complement as A implies minimum, exactly as intuitionistic logic. Of course, this is a model for intuitionistic logic, so everything works again. And here is a nice example. This is a hating algebra. Now the complement of this element A is the pseudo complement. Excuse me, is this here on the right, and this element has authentic complement, is a double negation. So we see that A is strictly below double negation. So they are different. In double negation is not the true. So double negation is not the same as to say yes. On the other way, the meet of A and not A is this element is not one. So here we have an instance where A and not A is not a theorem. So this A and not A, the third, the excluded middle is not a theorem. Okay, the deep connection between intuitionism and topology lies in the fact that the basic example of hating algebra are the open sets of a topological space. So topology and hating algebra and intuitionistic propositional logic are very, very close, and this is known since Tarski. Nothing new. Now the alpha graphs. What is the idea of the alpha graphs? We know already that for the implication and the disjunction we need new signs, because in inclusionistic logic we cannot define these connectives in terms of negation and conjunctions. It's not possible. So we need new signs. So we use these signs. This simple sign, this is called by Peirce a scroll. Peirce uses this as an abbreviation of the implication. And he called this a scroll, and he used it for some years, and then he abandoned it. But this is the difference with the implication is that the inner cut is joined to the outer cut on one point. So this is the outer curve is a cut, and the inner curve is a loop, which is joined by the outer by the outer cut just at one point. For the disjunction, of course, there are two loops, and so we have a double cut, and the absurd is an empty cut, and we define the negation in the usual way. Intuitionistic usual way is the implication of an empty cut, the inclination of absurd, that is the negation. So we have the graphs, and so we can draw every formula, every proposition, every intuitionistic formula, and we have rules, and again we have the same 5 rules. This is just a variation on a theme of Peirce. Just
Tá bom, no final eu vejo.
It is just the same rules. We define that this area is even, the inside of a loop is even. We define this or we prove it mathematically as you like it. There are also rules for the erasure and writing of loops. So in an even in an odd area. You can add a loop if you want, and there are some details, but basically are the same rules. The only rule that's changed is the double cut. We have no double negation here. So what is the substitute of this rule? Well, the substitute is you can write or erase a scroll with the outer side, with an empty outer side. It is just the same as a double cut, but it is connected at this point. So using this scroll, we have the 5 rules, and we can prove again modus ponens. This is just proof if this works. Modus ponens, they iterate the A, and then we have a scroll. You can erase the scroll, and you can erase A, and it is okay. Here is modus ponens, but this is very simple proof. Now I have just one proof. What has a little more sense. In intuitionistic logic, from the implication we can derive the not alpha and not beta. This is the classical graph for implication. This is the intuitionistic graph for implication. From a geometric point of view, it is just the loop. You can lose the loop, and then the loop is loose, but you cannot put it on again. It is just asymmetric. You can lose this loop, and then you can not put it on again, because these two graphs are not equivalent. Here is the proof from the implication. We can here insert the negation of B, and then we can iterate this to the inside, and here the inside is B and not B, and that of course is a contradiction. We iterate B, we erase B and B, we iterate B, and here we have the negation, but that by definition is the negation of A and not B. So we arrive at this graph. So this is a proof of this purely intuitionistic. There is a proof that this system is equivalent to the formal system with axioms and modus ponens proposed by Hating. So this, it has a lot of technical questions I will not address now. What is more interesting thing, I think, is that this system can be extended to many other logics. In this graph, in this diagram, in this lattice, at the center is intuitionistic logic, intuitionistic propositional logic, and above is classical propositional logic. There is a continuum of logics between them. That is a theorem proved in the 60s by a Russian mathematician, Jankov. From these logics, there is an enumerable subset of logics that are finitely axiomatizable, that is just to the intuitionistic logic at finite axioms. If you have finite axioms, since we have conjunction, you can put them into one axiom. So all these logics are intermediate logics with just one added axiom to intuitionistic logic. Intuitionistic logic add one axiom. Now, from the graphical point of view, you have a system of graphics for intuitionistic logic. So we want to add one axiom. That's no problem. Just draw your axiom, and you define this drawing, this graph. I can insert and erase whenever I want, and then I have a system from every of these infinite intermediate logics that are finitely axiomatizable. So the idea of existential graphs explodes to many other logics. Of course, if I add the excluded middle, or I add the double negation, I get classical propositional logic, a system equivalent to this. We also can go to the other side. We can consider sub-logics of intuitionistic propositional logic, like this. This is just only conjunction and implication. That is, if you take the sheet of assertion and only consider conjunction, when you put different letters there, and for the implication, you use only the scroll. We have no other curves, only the scroll and letters. Then you have a system of existential graph with the same 5 rules of transformation. You have a system for implicative logic with conjunction. Also for conjunction and disjunction, for only implication. For the negation, we add the empty cut, and then we have these 3 logics, and we add the principle of explosion, and then we have these logics here. So these 6 logics here are logics without principle of explosion. So these are paraconsistent logics with systems of existential graphs. This is our current state of art, and the green dots are logics with existential graphs, the yellows also, the red are work in progress. Okay, in this second chapter, in this section, we have also a historical note on intuitionism, also the crypto models for intuitionistic logic is another semantics. There are many more results on intuitionistic logic. There is a formal equivalence, and also there are intuitionistic beta and gamma graphs. Everything works okay. In the third part, it is just the other way around between logic and geometry. First, we had logics, and we try to geometrize them. We try to put geometry, existential graphs to these logics, to these given logics. Now we go the other way, and from geometry, we try to put some problems to logic. From geometry, we give problems back to logic. The idea is very simple. Always we make our existential graphs on a sheet, and we suppose the sheet is infinite and plane, and it is just a Cartesian plane. But there is nothing that prevents us to think of the sheet of assertion in this way. We can draw existential graphs on any surface, like the very nice surface that the organizers chose for this meeting. It's a very nice surface, and we can draw existential graphs on this surface. Of course, so the results are very surprising, of course. On the sphere happens the same as with geometry. If we restrict ourselves to a very small place, to Ibagué, Colombia, then the logic is classical, of course. But if we allow our cuts to go around the world, then there is no longer inside and outside. There is no inside and outside. There are no even and no odd areas. So we have less than the classical logic. That is not a logic of negation. We only what can say is that B and C are opposite. It is a logic of opposition on the sphere. On the sphere, the existential graphs are not a logic in the sense of traditional sense. It is a relative logic, a logic of opposition between distinct points or distinct areas. When we work to the cylinder, on the cylinder there are 2 kinds of cuts. There are cuts that can be contracted and also cuts that go around the world, and you cannot contract them. These cuts that go around the world divide the cylinder in 2 parts. So these are opposition cuts, and these are negation cuts. So there are two kinds of cuts, and we have negation and we have opposition. So we have 2 notions that are in this logic. For these logics, we have still no rules of transformation like the Persian. On the torus, there is a very nice question, that is, if you draw just one non-contractible cut, it does not divide anything. It makes the torus into a cylinder, but this does not anything does not do anything else. If you could make two cuts, then you have division. So you have to make two or more of these cuts to have truly opposition. You have also contractible cuts. On the Mobius strip, you have usual contractible cuts, but also you have cuts that go just long around the word. And some of them divide the word in two, and some of them do not divide. This is very, very strange. Every time there are more kinds of cuts, there are more problems in the interpretation of the graphs, but there is more richness in the logic that could be studied. So on these three surfaces, we have proved that on these three surfaces of the right, cylinder, the torus, and the Mobius strip, if we restrict ourselves to contractible cuts, like these cuts, then we have classical logic. That is very surprising because you don't expect to have classical logic on the torus, but it does work if you restrict yourself to contractible cuts. That does not happen on any surface because on the sphere, all cuts are contractible and the logic is not the classical one. So there are many problems here. And in this chapter, we just address the general ideas. There are the definition of the graphs on any surface. That works very fine. But then the interpretation and the technical results, that is a more open problem. And that is what we call here the way ahead. So with this, I will thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Muito obrigado for your patience.
Thank you. Gracias, Arnold. Okay, we have half an hour. We have time. We'd like to congratulate. Fantastic, the results. I personally have a lot of doubts and questions. But now, Fernando, would you like to add some information? Please, because we have time.
Yes, please. I will take some minutes to present what did Gustavo, because I see that Gustavo Arengas didn't arrive and he is not with us. Probably he had some problem with the connection. So I will present very briefly what Gustavo did. Here you have the chapters of our book. One thing to insist again on this book is the theorematic force of the results. All of the results are theorematic in some good systems of mathematics in which the precise definitions are given, and with those precise definitions, then things are proved. So the continuum has a good definition. It captures all the richness of Peirce, and Francisco has been able to prove a lot of things in this ongoing Peirce's continuum. So we have a model on which philosophy can now rest with some precision and with some certainty. With the same with Arnold, with the construction of Arnold, we have precise definitions to understand what is a topological logic thanks to the existential intuitionistic graphs. Also, Gustavo Arengas did something in that same sense. He provided good definitions in order to prove the pragmatic maxim. So we have here a lot of different approaches to, in general, introduce enough mathematics, enough precise mathematics to prove parts of the architectonics of the system. Peirce was very much interested in constructing some kind of mathematical metaphysics, he said several times. And these chapters provide those foundations for these mathematical metaphysics. We have mathematical theorems, mathematical definitions, which are related to the architectonics. And the pragmatic maxim is now a theorem. The construction of Peirce's continuum is now a theorem. And the construction of a nice topological logic related to intuitionistic logic is now a theorem. So we have all these theorems. These theorems produce a lot of technical forces to the system. Peirce's system becomes very much strengthened by these constructions. So I will very briefly mention what Gustavo did. It's a pity that he couldn't be here, but I have a final chapter in this book in which I assess very briefly the models by Arengas, Vargas, and Ostra. And I will, the only thing that I will do here is to read a little of my chapters, or some paragraphs of my chapters, of my chapter on Arengas. So Arengas talks about the pragmatic maxim. I will not recall that. It is simply known by every one of you, the different forms of the pragmatic maxim. Perhaps something interesting is a diagrammatic rendering of the maxim. This is a diagrammatic rendering of the maxim, in which at the left you have the sign, and the sign is understood by its very much different representations in different contexts, and in each context you have the action and reaction of the representation of the sign. So at the left you have the actual sign, and at the right you have all the possible contexts, and inside each context you have the representation of that sign and the necessary action inside that context. So in this drawing you have a full modal representation of the maxim. Actuality is understood by the different contexts and the representations in those different contexts. So actuality becomes a kind of integration of all different possible representations. That is why I call usually the pragmatic maxim a differential and integral calculus for our times, in which you have all these pragmatic differentials which are integrated to the maxim. So this has become now a systematic rendering by Gustavo. I will read now about what did Gustavo. In his PhD thesis between 2016 and 2020, Gustavo has now fully mathematized the pragmatic maxim as sketched in the figure that I just represented, yielding a vast array of particular theorems in completely formalized context. That is very important for me, that you have enough context in which you can formalize the pragmatic maxim. It's not just one, you have several contexts, and each of them you have a proof. Using the basic tools of category theory, that is synthetic morphism composition, instead of analytic elements decomposition, that is something which is also very interesting. To obtain the full proof of the pragmatic maxim, you have to change the perspective. You cannot be just analytic. You have to use the synthetic tools of category theory. Arengas studies the contextual, pragmatic understanding of a given sign, the actuality, through its visible interpretation arrows, from the sign to its subdeterminations, hoping afterwards to capture back the sign, thanks to the category theoretic limit of those arrows. So here at the left, you have the actual sign. At the right, you have all those different representations, all those possible different pragmatic differentials, and then you take the limiter of those using the category theory, and you hope that the limiter of those will come back to the sign. So that's the idea of Gustavo. This produces in a natural way an arrow going from the sign to the limit. And the pragmaticist maxim can be encrypted in the very simple property. The pragmatic maxim says that the sign is isomorphic to its limit representation. So we have a definition, and we have a conjecture, and then Gustavo produces a proof of that conjecture. Thanks to the duality capabilities of category theory, the situation can now be inverted, and the copragmaticist maxim, that he calls CoPM, expresses how a hidden sign can emerge from its residual interpretations. The main bulk of Arenga's technical definitions, lemmas, and theorems consists then in obtaining nice conditions in categories, generators, reflections, adjoints, separation, gluing, filtering, projectivity. There is a lot of very good technical, mathematical strength here using category theory in order to prove either the pragmatic maxim or the co-pragmatic maxim. Applying those general theorems to the particular category of behating algebras, the algebras that Arnold introduced a moment ago, Arenga obtains the pragmatic representations in terms of order and iterated modal operators. Further, the general category theoretic and particular order results are extruded to the length of, again, a lot of very beautiful mathematical tools of today, Vygotsky's homotopy type theory, providing bounded computable proofs. The proofs are not only general abstract proofs, but the proofs are computable in the sense of recursive function theory. In this way, Peirce's proof of pragmatism turns out to be fully mathematized and conclusively proved, at least in the very broad context of category theory. That for me is extremely important, as I think this should be very important for philosophy in general. Philosophy should take into account in the future about these proofs, and this explains in a very good way why the system of Peirce is so perfect. Now we have enough technical understanding of all the different layers of the architectonics, and all the different layers are extremely well connected, the ones with the others, in a mathematical way. We have proofs of the connections between all the different layers, and the architectonics is extremely sound. Now we cannot say, as Murray Murphy said in one moment, that the architectonics of Peirce was a beautiful castle in the air. No, it's not a castle in the air. Now it's something extremely concrete, well-founded, with good technical definitions and good technical proofs. That should be important for philosophy, I think, in general, to use mathematical proofs to help to foster the architectonics of the system. So I will finish here very briefly my quick presentation of Gustavo, so we have some sense of completeness of the book. And we are open, of course, to your questions and comments.
Thank you, Professor Fernando Zalamea. Thank you, Arnold. Thank you, Francisco Vargas, Arnoldo Ostra. And also thank you to Gustavo Arengas, represented here by Professor Fernando Zalamea. Excellent presentation, very difficult for who are not so familiar to logic and category theory and mathematics. But I think that we have several questions. I'm opening all the questions. Painel Reyes is here. He wrote some observation. Would you begin, Painel? Painel Carden.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, Professor Ítala. Fernando and company, that was very impressive. I was very, very pleased to hear these wonderful advances in Persian mathematics, that it really bespeaks volumes of the value of Persian logic, Persian mathematics, different phases to it. It's really remarkable. I think this achievement, this book that you just published, is really gonna change the game, as they say. I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, I mean, and of course, let me say just a word on behalf of the Sociedad Lationoamericana Peirce. We're really extremely honored to have you in this panel because, you know, we think this panel represents the immense promising talent that is brewing in the Latin American Academy, especially with regards of expanding Peirce's ideas. So very brief question, sorry about the long comment. So my question is, what do you foresee for the future, Fernando? Because I know you've said several times, and you're probably gonna repeat this, but please don't. You say, I moved away from Peirce, I'm into Grothendieck now, I'm doing so many other things now. But I'm sure in your heart of hearts, you're still very much somebody who is going to pursue more Persian quests. So my question is, as a team, but also personally, you know, like, what's next? What do you foresee coming up in the future of Persian mathematics?
Okay, yeah, thanks for the question and your comments, Paniel. In fact, I think that the question should be addressed by Francisco and Arnold. Because it is true that I am trying to move away from
everyone.
I am trying to move away from Peirce. It is true, but it is impossible. Always Peirce stays there, and we love Peirce so much that we continue to be around. But in fact, I think that the younger generations are the ones who are going to do something, have already done, but will continue in this way. They have expressed in their presentations that there are a lot of open problems. Those open problems, I think, are good, extremely good for the discipline of Persian mathematical studies. But what I would hope the most is that this kind of mathematical results for Peirce are studied in some sense and profited by the Persian community at large, not just by those who are interested in Persian mathematics like us, like our school here in Colombia, but also more in a more large sense in the world. That this shows that the Persian architectonic is extremely well constructed. This should be very important for the philosophers, I think, because Peirce obtains again and again and again from different perspectives more sense, more utilities for the world. It's a way of understanding things in which the larger community of Persian scholars could found itself. But I will leave it here. Please, Francisco and Arnold can continue in this way. Why these things are important and what is the hope for the future.
Thank you. That was amazing.
Thank you, Fernando. I think I can really say what follows for the overall Persian mathematics, but regarding the work I presented, I think, as I said, is just a starting point. Is what I have done is to try to see that you can really develop mathematics there. So if one takes that seriously, I think there's a whole program of developing usual mathematics, not only the things I already did, but other fields also. A very natural field to continue what I did is to continue with, for instance, multidimensional calculus or differential equations or differential geometry. I think there's a lot of work to do there, but of course that's huge and is something that exceeds what I can do. I think there's the need of a whole community of people working on that. So
thank you, Francisco. Yeah, I was going to say very quickly, I am using your proof as material for a research I'm doing in cosmology. I shouldn't say it because I haven't been successful yet, but I'm using your continuum to explain stuff in cosmology and then give an account of inflation. So I think it's hugely promising. I appreciate all that you guys are doing.
Okay, thank you, Paniel. I think another natural connection I see, I think there should be with the work of that Arnold presented is to think in existential graphs in the plane conceived as I presented it. So I think that should give rise to some other kinds of results in the same line as the ones presented by Arnold. I think that other logics probably can emerge there. So I think that's another more Peircean direction that could be pursued in the model.
Amazing.
I would like to comment. I think that you have not only mathematized Peirce's work. I think that you are presenting a logic formal systems that is being used by you as the basis for the mathematization of Peirce's work. You are working based on a very well presented formal system, logical formal system, I think. Not only mathematizing.
Yes, if I can enter there, that's something very interesting that has happened, that some problems by Peirce has produced new mathematics.
Yes.
The construction by Francisco, by Arnold, are new ways of understanding mathematics.
Yes.
That's something extremely interesting, and new systems of logic, new systems of geometry. That's extremely beautiful. But I think that Arnold could add something there.
I also think that I think that Francisco discussed something related to differential calculus. I think that you could develop a kind of non-classical differential calculus, I think, by using this mathematization.
Yeah, of course, it's a non-classical version of differential calculus.
Yes.
It's in a way, it's a version of non-standard differential calculus, but it's also different from the usual non-standard analysis in the Robinsonian sense.
Neil da Costa, at the beginning of this century, published a paper introducing for a consistent differential calculus. I have a student who developed this calculus, and I think that it would be very interesting because this kind of topological sense for the negation, for infinitesimals, is considered for this approach. Maybe it would be interesting. And I have several, okay, any other questions? Because I have several questions, but
Ítala, tem duas questões do professor André e uma questão no chat. Dá uma olhada no chat também.
Então,
a questão
chat,
da Juliana.
É Juliana.
Juliana e o André. O André estão pedindo.
André, eu não vejo a do André. A do André antes, bem antes. Tem a do Paniel.
Ele está com a mão levantada.
O André Detienne. Então o Detienne não escreveu a questão.
Não, ele está com a mão levantada.
Com a mão levantada. Hello, André. Professor André, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
Nice to meet you, to see you. Could you present your question, please?
Well, yes, I have certainly greatly appreciated this session. Thank you, Fernando and Arnold and Francisco And sorry for Gustavo, I would have loved to hear his presentation indeed, because all of those presentations are immensely important to the Peirce Scholarship. You are opening fields in your distinct efforts, whether in logic or mathematics, that show us the strength that a Peircean approach still has and may have for many more years, as far as coming to new, not only new sort of understanding, but new methods of application of what it is that he is doing to other fields. My question is always simple: is to all of this work that you are doing in logic and mathematics, extending Peirce toward the non-classical, the non-standard, really beyond what has been done before, turning that to new methods of comprehension that go beyond habits, the current habits that are at work within most traditions. Could you sort of predict, or do you envision certain range of applications of what you are doing into other disciplines, for instance, into the great quest in theoretical physics, or in certain understandings of social organization when they are viewed from a structural standpoint? If there are topological consequences to the work you are doing, do they impact research in more applied fields? And if so, what level of optimism for new enriching discoveries could this become an engine toward?
I can make a small comment, and then perhaps Arnold can continue on that line. About also related to a comment of Professor D'Ottaviano about paraconsistency. As hinted by Arnold in his presentation, we have the idea that the natural logic on the sphere may be a paraconsistent logic. That's something very natural to expect, with some variations. And another colleague of us in Colombia that we didn't talk about him, Manuel Sierra, has mathematically proved now that there are existential graphs which are paraconsistent. So the existential graphs are also now formally constructed in the paraconsistent formal systems. Answering a part of what Andrea was talking about, paraconsistency is very useful in the applications, as you know well. And the idea of having a natural paraconsistency in existential graphs is also captured by the idea that some kind of toposes capture existential graphs. And in toposes, the two basic currents are the intuitionistic logic of the topos, but also the paraconsistent logic of the topos. So toposes are very naturally connected to, on one side, intuitionism, and on the other side, paraconsistency. And we have already the idea that toposes are extremely related to existential graphs. That was part of the work of Anjuget that I presented very briefly in one moment. So, and we know that toposes are very related to mathematical physics. Mm-hmm. So it should be very natural in some moment that those existential graphs which are coming to intuitionism or the paraconsistency should have some natural applications to physics. So that's something to be expected. It wouldn't be a surprise. But Arnold can continue on that line if you want.
Thank you.
No, thank you for the questions. It's very hard to predict the future, but in a general way, the use of graphs could be very useful in physics, in the study of surfaces. These are the Riemann surfaces are studied by very simple graphs, that the descending funds, and also in this modern trend of big data and this line, the graphs could be very nicely applied to these lines. The problem is that in mathematics there still exists some aversion towards graphics. The drawings are bad, are dangerous, we only believe in algebraic formulas and formal proofs, but existential graphs are formal proofs made with graphs. So maybe the existential graphs could help us to change our mind about drawings, about graphics, and use them as they can be used. And in this way, I think existential graphs are very, very useful, and they surely will be very useful in the future in physics and in applied mathematics and in many areas. We hope so. We only can work and promote and show that you can do formal mathematics with Peirce's graphs. And to come back about an earlier question, more than only mathematizing Peirce's work, we try to use Peirce's ideas to go further than Peirce himself could think, and many times further than we ourselves think. We are doing things with existential graphs that 5 years ago we didn't believe they could be done. So the existential graphs can carry us very further, and further than only formalizing what Peirce did. We can use it to actual mathematical problems, and that is what we try to do and try to show.
Arnold, when you began showing your system of existential graphs for intuitionistic logic, I immediately thought that it would be possible to present these systems of existential graphs for consistent logics, because the first system, formal system for intuitionistic logic was not introduced by Haiti. It was introduced by Kolmogorov in 1925. And Kolmogorov's intuitionistic system is paraconsistent. And his negation is such that the law, the ex fausto sequitur quodlibet, is not valid in general, but only for negative formulas. So in the Haitian system, you have from the absurd, you derives any formula. But in Kolmogorov's system, from absurd, you only derives negated formulas. And so maybe this could be an idea for creating these graphs for this first intuitionistic logic that is paraconsistent. But I would like to also comment about André Detienne's question. I think that from the logical point of view, these general studies that you are developing concerning systems of existential graphs, maybe it will be very important for the understanding of relations between the several kinds of non-classical logics that we have from this categorical point of view. Don't you think, Fernando? to understand the relations between distinct logics?
Yes, extremely important. That was well presented in the diagram of Arnold, where he had these complex webs of logics, which he's systematically studying. Well, yes, that's certainly something that will help a lot, and I think that your observation about the Kolmogorov system will be extremely interesting for Arnold. Personally, I didn't know about that system, and I think it's going to be extremely.
I could send you the paper.
Yes,
it's a very beautiful paper.
And that is going to be very interesting. Yes.
In fact, the logic that he introduced in this paper is exactly the minimal intuitionistic logic introduced by Johansson in 1936.
Excellent.
But from another approach. We have a question here in the chat by Juliana Acosta. Thanks for the presentation to all of you. Do you think that the mathematical proof of pragmaticism is just a proof of its consistency and beauty, or we could say more than that based on this proof?
I think that our Gustavo Arenga's ghost would answer that very nicely, but I will try to answer for Gustavo. I think that yes, there is more. There is a lot more beyond the beauty. The beauty is fundamental. I think for the mathematicians, beauty is one of the main goals to develop a kind of knowledge. But beyond beauty, there is harmony. And this harmony is, I think, very interesting for the system. The system of the Peirce system becomes extremely harmonious now that we have several proofs of the pragmaticist maxim, proofs of the continuum, proofs of the existential intuitionistic graphs, proofs on surfaces. So there is a harmony there, which is extremely interesting, I think, for our world today. Perhaps you all know that today there are elections in the USA. Those elections in the USA are showing that the world is completely crazy in this moment and extremely disconnected and non-harmonic. So this kind of results that mathematics is providing, that the architectonics of a system are providing, should be interesting for the usual people in the usual world, because they show that we can escape the complete craziness of politics today. And there is harmony, and that harmony can be related to a good use of pragmatism.
Thank you for this so beautiful reply. So instigating. Don't forget that we have just had a very crazy election in Brazil too last week.
Yes, you were very close to the abyss.
Yes. Any more question? Ivo. Please, Ivo.
First of all, I would like to congratulate all of you from this amazing School of Columbia for the outstanding, very outstanding work that you are doing. And I would like to wish a big success for the book you are publishing. I would like to say that we Latin Americans, we are quite proud of such work you are doing, you know, because, yeah, I'd like to say that. Okay. I have a question. It's may sound a little strange, but the question is like this. Remember the definition of Peirce's father, Benjamin Peirce, that mathematics is the science of possible worlds. I would like to ask you, what in your so amazing work would be applicable to a positive science in our world? And what would be only a description of a possible world?
I think that Francisco has a good way to answer that with his understanding of Kripke's models for the continuum.
Yeah, inside the model, you see that there is this realm of possibilities and growing amount of development of continuity. But my answer is more on another direction. I think that what the model shows is that Peirce's hypothesis on continuity is possible. It's a hypothesis that should not be denied as contradictory, or as Fernando said, just a castle on the air, which is a critique often done to Peirce. So I think that's up to the moment is just a possibility, a possible world for developing mathematics. But also, I think that some applications to the real world, so to say, could be addressed, and that's another question. In that, at that moment, at that point, it should be something more than just a possible world or a possibility. But the importance is that what is now shown is that these ideas are consistent, so are not per se inconsistent or impossible, right? Yeah.
Thank you. Andrea has another.
And Arnold maybe want to say something about that. Okay.
Arnold, would you like to say something? Your microphone is closed.
Well, just to confirm what they said, and what we already said, we hope that in the future this can be applied to practical sciences, and I am convinced that is possible, that will happen, but maybe it is not in our hands to make these applications. But the graphs are there, and the model of the continuum are there, and the pragmatic maxim is there. It is consistent, it is useful, so we hope other scientists will use it for their investigations.
When you say that the maxim is consistent, for me it's not this. You assume certain logical bases, and on account of this, you can prove the maxim. And so the maxim is consistent with the premises you have assumed. But I don't know from another point of view, it's consistent. It's provable according to a system, to a basic set of premises you have assumed. Yes?
Yeah, yes, but even the proofs are even not related to a specific logical foundation. The only thing that Gustavo is using in his several layers of proofs, because the proofs has several layers depending on the assumptions that you take at the beginning. But the only thing that he is using is category theory, nothing more. Just category theory, no logic beyond on the foundation.
Yeah.
You can think that it's just a very broad logic. It could be a very broad intuitionistic logic, but in fact, it's something very basic. And he's able to prove that the different layers of the pragmatic maxim can be approached by recursive functions. So it's the proof is computable in some sense. So it's very, very general. The only
yes,
thing
but the result is consistent relatively to what? The result is consistent relatively to what? No, I know the result.
I am not saying that it is consistent relatively to something, but just that if you accept the basics of category theory and you introduce some very simple and general basic definitions, then in that context you can prove the maximum. So it's not that it's consistent with respect to that, but if you assume the architectonics of category theory, inside category theory, you can prove the pragmatic
it's
maximum.
not contradictory to the relatively to the view. That's it.
No.
Okay. I agree.
You have a full proof using the tools of category theory.
Okay. Thank you. Any more questions?
I think Andrea has another question.
Andrea has another.
Andrea?
Yes, I would like to add two things. One, in reaction to your last question, sometimes I tell my students the pragmatic maxim is the maxim of logic itself, or the maxim of any logic. And I don't know whether you would agree with this. The other point I want to make is completely different. Here we are in a circle of mathematicians, but also logicians, and I would like to remember the passing 3 months ago of Shea Zellweger, who died on August 7. And Shea Zellweger spent several decades of his life studying Peirce's logic, organizing manuscripts, especially minute logic and the Carnegie application. But also he and his friend Glenn Clark worked on Peirce's notation for the 16 binary connectives and did remarkable work redesigning that notation for purposes he hoped of improving logical notation in general. So my naive question, especially to Arnold, is, and it is naive, there are 16 connectives. I have not seen those 16 connectives in your diagrams. Is there any future to them?
Good question.
Well, of course, I have studied Zellweger's notation, and with Zellweger we were friends, and he designed a new notation for the 16 connectives. But this notation is very restricted to classical logic. So when you go out to intuitionistic logic, then there are not 16. There is no limit to connectives. So this notation is very in a classical situation. Of course, there are very interesting connections with existential graphs. There are very nice connections with existential graphs, with the classical alpha graphs versus alpha graphs and the notation. We have studied the completeness of the connectives through existential graphs. And there is also a very nice connection because Peirce, his notation is just put an X and you have 4 quadrants and you close the quadrant which is false. So it is exactly the same as in as in alpha graphs. You enclose what is false. So there are very nice connections between this notation and Zellweger's notation and the Peirce's alpha graphs in classical logic. And that is very nice connection. Thank you for mentioning it, because this is a very good connection. And then when you speak with intuitionistic graphs, then we have no more connectives. But in the classical connection, in the classical setting, there we have this very nice connection with Peirce's and Zellweger's notation. Thank you very much, Andre, for this.
So are you saying that so in intuitionistic logic there are no truth tables?
Correct, that's right. That was what I was looking for to say. That is exactly the right question. There are not truth tables, so there are not a limited quantity of connectives because there are not truth tables. That's right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Any more question?
Ítala has a question from Rosa Mayorga.
Okay, now I see. Rosa, please.
Greetings from Miami, everyone. I hope the connection, I just turned my camera on. I was having a little bit of an issue with the connection. A comment and also a question. Well, first of all, thank you, Fernando, for the invitation to this wonderful presentation. And congratulations to Francisco, Arnold, and also Gustavo and everyone for this very impressive work. One question. All the time, I was thinking, what would Peirce think about this wonderful work that you've done? And so specifically, the question that I have in mind is this something that you think he was working towards? And in that sense, you were inspired to complete? Or is this something that you don't think that he was working towards, but would have certainly approved of?
I would think that he was certainly working on that. Thanks for your comment and your presence, Rosa. He was certainly looking for some kind of proof of pragmatism, because he said it several times, and he constructed his architectonics in order to do that.
What happened? Mathematics, but with mathematics, the proof?
Yes, but what happened in that time that the tools were not available. He hadn't available the nice tools that both Francisco, Gustavo, and Arnold have used. The development of mathematics in the 20th century was good enough to come back to Peirce's ideas. But he had certainly the hope of that construction. And what would have he thought about that? First of all, he would have been completely bewildered of that. So in a remote region of the world, as Colombia, something was done to help him into his system. He would have been completely amazed and surprised that that thing is possible. So first of all, surprise. Then he would be happy, certainly. He would be extremely happy because the tools of the mathematics in the 20th century are showing that all of his ideas, when I say all, it's all of the ideas. It's extremely impressive for us that all the architectonics comes together very nicely. There are no things loose, there are no contradictions. He was not crazy, as many people said after his death, that all the things that he was doing was just crazy things. The famous comment by Quine that the existential graph was some kind of stupid game, things like that, doesn't make any sense today. So he would have been surprised, happy, and I think that probably he would have, I don't know how to express it, he would have been extremely content of this construction. But
that's wonderful. And I think, well, you should be proud, you all should be proud, and we are very proud of your work.
Thank you very much, Rosa. And Francisco and Arnold can continue there.
Thank you. Of course, as Fernando said, there are many things Peirce even could not anticipate, because the development of mathematics in the 20th century is amazing. So there are many things, intuitionistic logic and things like that Peirce could not have anticipated. But in many of his writings that are now about the graphs that are now coming to publication, thanks to Pietarinen in this series of works of Peirceana. In many places he writes things like, I hope in the future some scholars will work this out. I have no time, but maybe my students will do it, and things like that. So he hoped many people would take these ideas and develop them further, and so I am completely sure, as Fernando, that he will be delighted to see the new ideas about existential graphs and about the continuum, and so that's right. Here's the sentence that we found. That is very nice, and that has inspired us always, that Peirce would like us to go further.
I would like to say also that Peirce was a forerunner of all the development of logic in the 20th century. Mm-hmm. He foresaw the creation of non-classical logics. In his short manuscript of 1909, he presented several kinds of negations and relations between connectives that are the forerunners of the connectives and of the paracomplete and paraconsistent negations. I always think that he knew everything. He had not time to develop it. He is a forerunner of relation algebras, of non-classical logics. And so it seems that he foresaw the development of logic and mathematics and science of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. It's very beautiful, it's formidable.
But there was also something formidable, Francisco will continue, something formidable with Peirce that we do not have anymore. He had time. He had like 30 years of working every day, 5 pages, content in his farm. He didn't have any academic obligations. He was far from the world. He had time. That's something very important that we have lost completely. Francisco?
Yeah, just to answer Professor Mayorga's question about how this relates with what Peirce explicitly said. I think that the model in the construction, at least the idea is present in some of the new elements of mathematics by Peirce. So this idea of taking sequences of real numbers, and as I said, he thought that real numbers are just an embryo of continuity and carry on this process. But he had not the technical tools for performing this construction, because there was no axiomatic set theory. So there was no also this distinction I use between set and proper class. There was not the idea of doing transfinite recursion over the class of ordinal numbers. There was no the notion of the formal definition of a model, or the formal definition of Kripke model, of course. So I think that the main ideas are very close to what he explicitly said or proposed, but he had not the technical tools to perform that.
No, and that's even more impressive what you've done, because you have proved that he was on the right track, right. And you've used other means to prove that on your own with what else you have learned independently of him. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, and also about, for instance, infinitesimal calculus, it was a real surprise even to me that infinitesimal calculus with infinitesimals as Peirce wanted was possible to perform in this context, in this framework. So I think that also that's in harmony with his thought about and his conception of analysis. Yeah.
Yeah, and Francisco said it very quickly in his presentation, but it's something beautiful that he has done is the introduction of some kind of higher order geometric infinitesimals, not just the usual infinitesimals of the non-standard analysis, but something more geometrical, more coming back for probably to the forerunners of the calculus in the 17th century. But he has done it in a very precise way. That's something very beautiful that also Peirce would have been extremely happy to know about.
Wonderful.
I'm afraid that we have to close the table, Ivo, unfortunately, but we are here.
Yes,
for 2 hours and a half. We have to finish. Unfortunately.
We are 20 minutes before the time.
Yes.
Before, no, after the time.
After the time, water.
Yeah, okay.
And so I would like to thank again Professor Fernando, Gustavo, not present, and Francisco, Arnold, for the fantastic instigating table. And congratulate for this so beautiful work you have been developing. And
thank you very much, Professor Ítala, for the moderation, Professor Ivy for the invitation in the name of all of us.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for participating in the meeting. And thank you for inviting me to coordinate this fabulous meeting, the table, Ivo.
You are very welcome.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oi, Ryan, muito obrigada. Lucas, muito obrigada.
Disponha.
Adriana está aí também, Júlio.
Eu que agradeço, professora. Incrível, hein?
Vamos bem. Está sendo muito bom o evento. Então, acho que podemos, se vocês tiverem alguma dúvida, pode perguntar, senão nós podemos encerrar. Tudo bem, Adriana?
Eu acho que a gente está ao vivo ainda no YouTube.